This evening, the board did meet in executive session prior to this meeting tonight to discuss personnel and security issues. There is a motion, or I'd like to make a motion to amend an agenda item 8C. I'd like to remove that from the agenda this evening until January. So,
Second.
okay, questions or comments? Just a couple of announcements this evening. The board did meet in executive session prior to this meeting tonight to discuss personnel and security issues. Okay, with that, questions or comments on removing 8C until January?
Could you repeat that?
No. We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. I'd also like to make a motion to amend, I believe it is 6D10. 6D10, if you'll refer to your agenda. This is under Finance, the Lakeside Youth Service and Educational Network. That just needs to be amended to say pending solicitor approval. And I don't believe that we need to do anything with that at this point. I just want to make note of that prior to public comment. And regarding in-person attendance, at this time, we are still able to accommodate 168 attendees, socially distanced 6 feet apart. So if you are here, please do not move your chairs around. Masks are required to be worn properly by all at all times. Okay, regarding public comment, with respect for one another, members of the Springford community will have 3 minutes to speak with no cap. Should public comment run for more than an hour, I will ask our board to revisit a cap at that time. Tonight, as always, public comment in the beginning of the meeting will be taken on agenda items only. At the end of the meeting, public comment will again take place. Also, I will do my best to balance comments from those in person, although I don't see too many guests in attendance, and from also those on Zoom. And with that, Ishika or Allison, do you have any comments this evening or announcements?
There are no announcements this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Zazowski,
Yes.
I just want to remind you that Mrs. Vizzini is joining us via Zoom, so we need to make sure we get her vote when we vote on motions.
Okay, thank you for that reminder. So with that, public to be heard on agenda items only. We seem to have no comments here, so are there any on the Zoom?
We have one comment. Heather B., you may now make public comment. Please state your first and last name, full address, and your public comment on agenda items only, please.
Hi, my name is Heather Bitzer. I live at 34 Leatherwood Drive in Collegeville, and I will be speaking on agenda item 6, Finance, letter G, regarding additional funding for Springford Cyber Learning. I watch all of the school board meetings, and I don't think I've ever heard a cyber parent call in. I can't speak for all cyber parents, but I do speak for my family when I say we have not called in because we are absolutely happy with Springford Cyber. And I realize positive feedback is just as important as identifying problems. So when I saw item 6G on the agenda, I thought it was the perfect opportunity to speak up and encourage additional funding for this absolute treasure of a program. We have a 5th grader and a 7th grader in Springford Cyber. We want you to know we are happy. Our students' needs are being met in an outstanding fashion, and we are getting exactly what Springford Cyber Learning promised us as we were weighing our options over the summer. And yes, some of those options would have taken us out of the district. With Springford Cyber Learning, my kids are provided an academically challenging curriculum and 100% stability in the face of ever-changing guidelines, mandates, and color-coded schedules. So when you're considering item 6G or the future of Springford Cyber in general, I ask you to remember my family and the many others like us who don't call in because our needs are being met beautifully by Dr. Rockland, Amanda Myers, and the staff and teachers of Springford Cyber Learning. And if properly funded, this program could have a big, big future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any
There
other
are no more
comments?
hands raised this time.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then through our agenda, we are on to presentations. Mr. McDaniel.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be here again to recognize our champions of the fall sports. But first, before we would do that, I do want to thank every member of the school board and every member of our administration who pushed for us, or not pushed, who supported us to be able to play our fall sports this fall. And we had a successful campaign, but the most success we had was that everyone got to finish their season. The only games that may have been postponed were due to the other school not having that level or not having enough players towards the end of the year. So we are thankful for that you gave this opportunity for our student athletes to experience success. Again, not just on the field or the courts, but success in the idea that they were able to play in light of this pandemic. So the first group I'd like to recognize tonight for our middle school undefeated team this year was our 7th and 8th grade cross country team. They beat O&J in the last meet. Wait till the picture. It should be the very first one. There you go. Thank you. Our undefeated team this year at the middle school level was our 7th and 8th grade boys cross country team, who defeated O&J Roberts in the last meet of the season to finish off at a 5-0 record. They are coached by Dave Caldwell, Jeff Kaler, Courtney Amersbach, and Matt Jarima. So congratulations to our 7th and 8th grade boys cross country team. Moving on to our high school, we'd like to recognize Mia Matrosino, who, along with the support of her head coaches, Todd Reagan, and assistant coaches, Devin Stano and Karen Canuso, was able to win the Pioneer Athletic Conference Girls Singles Tennis Championship. And in the championship match, she won 6-1, 6-2. Just so you know, Mia is a freshman. She also qualified for the PIAA District 1 singles tournament, and her only loss of the season came in the championship match. So congratulations to Mia on a great year, and we got another 3 great years of Mia. Our girls tennis team. Head coach Todd Reagan, assistant coaches Devin Stano and Karen Canuso. We congratulate them and recognize them for winning the Pioneer Athletic Conference Championship with a league record of 8 wins and 0 losses, the PIAA District 1 AAA Championship, and the PIAA AAA State Championship. They were able to win the Pioneer Athletic Conference Championship when they defeated Boyertown 7-0 in the last match of the regular season. And then they went on to play Henderson in the first match of the district tournament. Our girls tennis team had never won a district match, but they defeated Henderson that day to get that first goal achieved, and by 3-2. Then they went down to Unionville, the #1 seed, and defeated them 3-2. And then they traveled to Wissahickon, where they earned the district championship by defeating Wissahickon 4-1. Then in the state tournament, they defeated Cardinal O'Hara 5-0 in the first round of the states, which qualified them to go to Hershey Racket Club for the state semis and the state championship. They shut out Southern Lehigh 4-0 in the semifinal match. And then they defeat Greater Latrobe 3-2 in the finals. Not only were these girls successful on the court, but they are successful off the court. They're a great group of young ladies who are led by a fantastic coaching staff, and we couldn't be more happier for them earning the Pinnacle Championship, this PIAA State Championship for girls tennis. So congratulations to our girls tennis team. Our girls soccer team, head coach Tim Robb, assistant coaches Rob Rooney and Jamie Mayer, and also our strength and conditioning coach Will Giasitz, for winning the Pioneer Athletic Conference Championship with a league record of 10 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie. They were able to clinch their piece of the championship when they defeated Pottsgrove by a score of 5-2. This is the 4th PAC championship that our girls soccer has won, and they advanced to the District 1 championship game where they lost to eventual state champion Penn Ridge 2-0. But even besides that, they had a great season, a great group of young ladies as well, and a great coaching staff. So we want to congratulate them on a fantastic season. Our football team won their 13th championship in school history, and they also advanced to the PIAA District 1 playoffs. Their head coach, Chad Brubaker, and assistant coaches Steve Shine, Jim Mick, Chad Strickler, Gary Rodenball, Charles Nestle, Steve Entenman, and volunteers Jim Algio, Tyler Hartramp, and strength and conditioning coach Will Giasitz. They went on to win the Pioneer Athletic Conference when they defeated Owen J. Roberts 28-0, which ran their record to 5-0 in the conference. They then played Cumberland Valley in a non-league game and defeated one of the top teams that usually in the state. And then they lost a heartbreaking game to Souderton in the District 1 playoffs. Souderton, by the way, went on to advance to the PIAA state semifinals where they just lost this past weekend. But congratulations to our football team and their fine group of young men and the coaches on a great season. Congratulations to our football team. Our boys cross country championship team won their title on the same day that football won. And their head coach is Dave Kane, assistant coaches Danielle Stauffer and Matt Varaday, and our strength coach Will Giasitz. The boys finished with a league record of 7 wins and no losses. It was their 4th championship in school history, and the team advanced to the District 1 championship meet. So congratulations to our boys cross country team. I do want to let you know, the pictures you see up there, all the team pictures, they were not taken in that format. They were all photoshopped in, so we met social distancing requirements on picture day. That is all individual pictures that VSN slid in together to make it look like a team picture, but please understand it was all done in social distancing. So we really appreciate VSN doing it. We know it took them a lot more time than normal, but we wanted to make sure we did all the right things throughout this fall season. Any
Thank
questions?
you for presenting all of that and for the great news. I'm so glad that our students were able to compete in the fall sports and bring home all of those accolades and honors and awards to us. And not only did they compete, they did a fantastic job despite everything else that's going on. So I really do appreciate the good news. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and one last note on girls tennis. Once we get the banner and get it up, we will have an unveiling of the state championship banner, and we'll have to work through all these guidelines that we have, but we'll let the school board and administration know when we'd like to take that to take place.
We'd very much like to know and be invited to that, please.
Thank you.
Hey, Mickey, don't run away. As Colleen said, I want to congratulate all the winners and for having such a great season. But I also I think it's important to point out that we should commend all the coaches, the staff, and everyone that was involved for this fall sports season. Although it was a regular season and we had to jump through hoops sometimes to get, games in and meet protocols and everything else. But I just want to thank everyone that was involved. Like I said, the coaches, all the staff, yourself, Mr. Miscavige, for putting the plans in place and following the plans, because unlike some other school districts, we were able to successfully get through the fall season with minimal issues. And unfortunately, there are some schools that were impacted through positive test cases or whatever it may be. And I think that you guys have done everyone, did a tremendous job and should be commended for all your efforts for having, and on top of all, getting a state championship, as well as the PAC championship. So I just think that you guys, everyone did a great job. So I want to just say we appreciate that as well.
Yep, thank you. And our coaches really bought it. They had to, and they knew they had to buy in to make it happen, but they went above and beyond to make sure that all of our student athletes were safe and that we were able to get a season in. And I can't say enough about the coaches and the support of, as I mentioned earlier, support of all to make this happen. Now we move on to winter and we'll see what happens.
I'm going to ask a quick question that you're standing there and you mentioned that. Is there a mandate in place or not in place that all youth or all winter sports are postponed, or what's going on with that?
No, winter sports starts for high school on December 7th and middle school December 14th in our conference. We were to start 11:30, and then the Monco Office of Public Health mandate came out about the virtual school, and all extracurricular activities had to be suspended. That included workouts as well, had to be suspended until 12/7.
So as of 12/7, we're back as we know it today, which could change tomorrow, but as we know it today, winter sports are starting those dates that you just mentioned.
Yes, and the league schedule for the Pioneer Athletic Conference will commence on January 4th. So there'll be no games during the month of December. And with the December 7th start, the first legal play date that we could play games is Christmas Day. So obviously we're not going to be doing that unless we want to be like the NBA and have some TV games. But so the league will start January 4th, and non-league games will be able to commence after the regular scheduled last game on the league schedule. And that's been consistent throughout District 1 with the leagues.
Hey, I imagine there'll be potentially some more questions that will come up when we get to that item on the agenda as well. But with our next presentation, let's move on to that. Mr. Fink, our Chief Financial Officer, to give a presentation on the proposed preliminary budget for 2021-2022.
Good evening. How's everybody? Mickey McDaniel is always a tough act to follow, and I'm going to do my best to keep Mrs. Fern awake tonight, right? Presentation, do you have that, Bob? There we go. We see that okay? Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So every year around this time, we are required by state act to present the proposed preliminary budget. Bob, if you could advance, please. So quickly, we're going to go through the budget timeline, the challenges, of course, of preparing this budget at this time, some of the highlights, and then a few closing comments. You can go to the next slide. So as was discussed in finance 2 weeks ago, Mr. DeBello, is that about right? We talked about the timeline of preparing the budget and all the different dates and milestones that we have to hit by law. The first one, of course, is this presentation that we're doing tonight. The next will be, of course, to make the proposed preliminary budget public and allow inspection of that budget for an intended adoption of this proposed preliminary budget at the January board meeting. And this will allow us to keep our normal schedule of trying to get the final budget done by the end of May. And then we have, of course, some other requirements in there if we're going to apply for referendum exceptions, and then get those in by March the 4th. You can advance the slide, please. And then, there we go. And then, of course, all the way down to the bottom where we see the adoption of the final budget, we're targeting for the end of May. This past year, obviously because of the lovely COVID disruptions, we ended up in the first week of June, I believe it was. But that still gave us in the business office and our tax collectors enough time to do the things we need to do by that 6:30 deadline of getting invoices out. One thing I did add in there was that the top line on referendum questions, I'm just putting it out there just so that folks know that if we were ever to decide to go that route, we would have to get a question up to the county electors by March the 19th. And if we were going to do that, the primary where that question would come forth would be on May 18th, which of course would really make the budget schedule a bit tighter than it is. You can advance the slide, please. So the challenges, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record. For those of you who have heard me go through this before, we're only 4 months into the current fiscal year, so we don't have a lot of data, only 2 months into the school year. And then, of course, there's a pandemic on top of everything else, which has changed a lot of our data and made it a bit of an anomaly. On the state budget side, a lot of unknowns. I always post the education subsidy, transportation, special education subsidies. We're watching this closely. As I know Mr. DeBello and I do, we continually look at what's going on at the state level, what's going on in their budgeting process. Do they have do they have plans on filling some of their budget gaps that they have, and how do they plan on doing it? So we're watching those numbers. We're watching those numbers and those events very intently. And I'm interested to know if this will be a crazy state budget year like it was about 3 years ago, I think it was, considering where we are. You can advance the slide, please. So looking at some of the major items on the expenditure side, as is usual, our wages and benefits account for about 75% of the total budget. So we're talking about the 2021 budget of about 172 million. About 70% of that has to do with wages and benefits. We are a service business, of course. Professional wages, just year over year growth, about $1.7 million increase. That's through step movement and that type of stuff through our contract. Our administrative support, about 473. And then, of course, we always build into our model the growth over the next couple of years as far as needs within our personnel. And those numbers are displayed there. So all in all, about a $3.5 million increase. This comes right off of our 7-year projection. So this model is built and is going forward, and then we'll tweak it as we go. Taxes and benefits, related expenditures, PSERS, again, another hike this year from 34.5% of wages to 35 and almost 35.5%. That's an 8.6% increase, or it equates to about $2 million to our budget line. Medical and dental health benefits, about estimating about at this point at least a 5% increase over last year. We did go through our first pass with Rischini, our health benefits consultant. They're always slightly north of where I am. Mrs. Leese and I work through this closely. Always a little bit more conservative than we are. We basically do ours based on the trends. So that's where our trends look like they're going. And of course, the payroll taxes. You can advance the slide, please. So when you look at everything side by side, looking at the 2021 budget where we are now and looking at the 21-22 proposed preliminary budget, we're looking at an increase overall of about $10 million as it stands right now. The interesting things, as I said before, the biggest chunk of those things are on the salaries and the benefits piece. Of course, they always are. And then some other items going on down the row as planned. What's interesting to me, as always, is that bottom right number, which shows me almost a 6% increase year over year, at least at this stage. You can advance the slide, please. That number is always interesting to me because when we look at the next slide, the first thing we see up there is organic revenues growing at about 1.5%. So the spread between the two, almost 6% to 1.5%, there's quite a difference. But in looking at that 1.5% would equate to about $1.6 million. Delinquent taxes, simply because of the time that we're in, I'm watching a slowdown in that, as we discussed in finance. A little bit of a slowdown on those collections, so that's dropped down a little bit. On the state level, again, watching this very closely. This is about, the state is about 21, 22% of our overall budget from revenue standpoint. And we're looking at, always we estimate the basic education funding subsidy to be the year prior, because we're always nervous about what the state is going to do. A little bit more nervous this year about that. Transportation subsidy really not expected to move very much. And of course, there is increased funding for the PSERS and that's the retirement and the employer share of Social Security taxes of about 1.2 million. That comes just simply because we're spending more on salaries. Just so we know, that's our halfway back. Federal, which accounts for less than 0.5%. Not expecting any changes there. So if you look at the revenue side by side, we're looking at about $167 million this year to $170 million next year. Again, a growth factor, a percentage of about 1.7%. So, and the most of that, of course, the bigger numbers of that are at the state level, mainly because of that PSERS number. You can advance, please. So if I look at what that means when we start adding all these numbers up, they're pretty big numbers. When we start looking at them, adding them up, we see about $170 million in revenues, about 182 in expenditures. We always appropriate about $4 million from our fund balance to help cover the differences. And also long-term planning of funds we've set aside in the past that we're now using for increases in those retirement numbers that I spoke about before. Looking at a gap in our budget right now as it stands, we still have a long way to go, of about $7.2 million. So that's the number we're looking at, sharpening our pencils very quickly. You can move on, Bob, please. So just so we know, and we can refresh everybody, if you haven't been in one of our finance meetings, the Act 1 index right now is, for the coming year, is 3%. Referendum exceptions, I'm looking at probably about $1.75 million that could possibly be recovered there if we decided to use those. We always apply for them. We haven't used them in quite some time. Our next steps, obviously, is to deep dive, do the ground up approach that we always do every year. Start looking at the data and the trend data for this coming year, figure out what COVID is doing to all of that, and keep a close eye on Harrisburg. That was a pretty quick run through. So the next steps would be, as there is an item in there for me to make this proposed preliminary budget public come January, so we can let the clock tick, to approve this so we can take our next step into getting a final budget in January, or getting it approved in January so we can move forward with our final by the end of the year. Any questions? Be surprised if there wasn't. Okay. No? Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank
It's
you.
a lot of information to digest, and we appreciate your efforts of continuing to keep us on the right track, and we will do that, take a look at that ourselves and perhaps have questions at a later time, but watch to see what improvements can be made to that over the next period of time.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Gooding could not be with us tonight, so Mr. Rizzo is going to give us an update on the status of the district, where we are, and share some highlights with us. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Just a couple of quick things. I'm gonna first hop into our latest numbers. I know we try to report on those as much as possible. So as of last week, and the way that it works out when it comes to our municipality data, the most recent information we have is from the Friday the week before, and we should get last week's numbers tomorrow. But as far as our municipality data in Limerick, we're at 127.16 incidents per 100,000 with an 8.81% PCR positivity. Royersford, 125.71 with a 7.19% PCR positivity. Upper Providence, 101.74 with a 5.68% PCR positivity. And then Spring City, they do it a little different because they're in Chester County, and we have 44 incidents total at 1.33% of their population. I also threw in there Collegeville and Schwenksville. They're smaller pieces, but they are some of that footprint is part of us, and that's 96.71 per 100,000, 3.41% for Collegeville. And then Schwenksville 67.43 at 7.84% positivity. Now Montgomery County, and that most recent data is last week. That's 229.8 at 8.5% PCR positivity. And then what will come out this Wednesday, generally we send out our updates. So this is a little bit of a ahead of the game thing. We had 16 students or staff in the last week and the last 7 days identified with COVID. Some more information in Montgomery County. I can go through the hospitalization data over the last 7 days, going backwards from November 23rd down to a week ago. 255 was today, 247. Yesterday, 250, 238, 218, 221, 206, 191. So about a steady climb with that. Excuse me. And then just one more little piece of data to share about that is the average age. Some of the questions came up in terms of the average age of positive cases. Royersford, the average age is 40.4, Collegeville 40.3, Limerick 40.7, and Upper Providence 48. Those are average ages of positive cases. So that's some numbers for you. As you all know, Montgomery County Office of Public Health issued a 2-week closure for us. This is the first week of that, the first day of the first week. Our students are off already. So the way we're handling that is this week, all students are, well, next week, all students will be virtual Monday through Friday. Next week, 11:30 to 12:04 as per the order. Our 12-month employees are reporting to work for those 2 weeks. Our 10-month instructional employees have the option to work from home or in their classrooms for those 2 weeks. Our 10-month non-instructional employees will be required to report for those 2 weeks. And we are still providing curbside food service at our depots. Our school police are on site monitoring buildings and other tasks assigned by Chief Boyer. Hot off the press, today there were some new orders issued by the governor. The impact in our district is to be determined. But one of the big things is an attestation form that all school entities need to complete by November 30th, basically stating that we're going to comply with the masking order. We're going to report. We're going to contact trace as per the governor's guidance. And Mr. Fitzgerald, if you wanted to weigh in on that a little bit more.
Oh, sure. And you are correct, Mr. Rizzo. This is hot off the presses this afternoon. This just came out from the state, along with a number of other mitigation initiatives, but specific to public schools. And my understanding is this is specific to public schools, not private schools, that from guidance from the Department of Health and PDE says if the schools desire to remain in person on some level, and how I read it, it would mean if we literally have one class here, we would have to sign off on this indicating that we are in person. So if we had a life skills classroom for special ed, we would have to sign this. That the district is essentially going to comply with 2 key components of the guidance from the state. The first being the updated universal face coverings order and the FAQs that were attached to it that came out last week. And the second issue is with regard to complying with identification of cases that occur within the school and then following the guidance to close when that occurs. I will break those out kind of separately. The first one with regard to the face coverings, from our review of the FAQs, really the impact on districts is likely nominal because most of the compliance was already occurring in schools as relates to what they put out on Thursday. The second issue is an interesting one because I think a lot of districts are finding this new guidance to be helpful. It is with regard to when you have to close based on incidents within the school. And instead of having percentages of population and the like, they kind of broke out the building sizes, which was, I think, extremely helpful. Because obviously one size does not fit all. Our elementaries are much smaller than our high school, and we should have some flexibility with that issue. And this guidance does break that out to kind of increase the number of cases that may occur over a rolling 14-day period in order to trigger a closure of potentially 3 to 7 days or higher if there's more cases. So that's what the district would be attesting to following, which frankly you would follow regardless. That's what you would do if you wanted to remain in your hybrid model.
Thank you.
Question.
Yeah.
I'd like to just ask you a question about that, if I could, since you were talking about the masks. How will that look for winter sports if we go forward with that? Is there any indication on there?
Well, I think we need to break it out into kind of two subcomponents. First, with regard to keeping schools open for in-person learning, will be a separate analysis as relates to the face covering order versus the face coverings for athletics. There is a separate analysis for athletics that we can go into, and frankly, from my perspective, there's still a lot of questions about how you can logically play a sport like basketball and wrestling and have face coverings. It's one of those that really doesn't have an answer at this point, because I would have concern, about not wearing masks, but at the same time about wearing masks, if you understand. That can be addressed kind of in a separate process vis-a-vis the universal face covering orders for in-school instruction and staff, students, and the like, which I don't think really is disturbed much from the order from Thursday.
Okay, so signing this attestation order or form, we're keeping that separate.
This would be specific to just in school, your model of instruction.
So the other piece of this is the recommendations for the identification of cases in COVID-19 am I correct with that?
Yes, that's the second prong of this.
So I guess the question is, and I'm looking at that on the PDE website, is, and part of it's not relevant right now because we are closed. Montgomery County has closed us down at this point. But I guess my question is, because it's based on the size of the building, are we in compliance with that? I know you ran through those numbers very quickly for us, but within the size of the buildings, I guess, we need, we're going to have to make the decision by November 30th to sign this, to keep our buildings open, whether we are compliant with that. It's within a 14-day period. If we are closed through November 30th, we technically won't have students in our building that are, like COVID positive. So based on that going forward, how do we make the determination of that? That's your question?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the interesting aspects for Montgomery County, unlike the rest of the state, is the fact that you're under a closure scenario right now. So how that plays out in terms of compliance is kind of an open question. Do you sign an attestation form indicating we're closed for a week, but then we're opening back up again, on December 7th? There's really not a legal answer to that. But to your response, I think once the doors, do open, then this is the model and the guidance that the administration at the building level and at central office would determine whether we need to close for this 3 to 7 day window or longer, depending on number of cases, in consultation generally with the Department of Health anyway, as they've already indicated that they would be consulting on these issues, because there will be a difference between cases that are identified to be transmitted within the school versus cases where somebody may have obtained the virus separate and apart from the school. And we would be working hand in glove with the Department of Health, the county level, on those issues.
It doesn't, thank you for that. It doesn't state here that it's whether they had it out, got it outside or within school, just the fact that there's, like, for example, 2 to 4 staff students in the same school building who are not household contacts. It's within a rolling 14-day period. So I guess this is what we're going to have to look at as a district is once the school building's open, if we're going to, to comply with this, we'll have to see within that 14-day period, the number of students when we're in the substantial area, whether we're substantial, moderate, or low. But another way that this is broken down is by building. So which leads us to the potential of shutting down, a building if it doesn't, if we can't comply with this, like one of the elementary buildings, for example, but leaving the rest of the district open, as opposed to shutting down the entire district, which is, I guess, a positive also. But it doesn't sound like it's going to really impact us until like that 2-week period after we return, because it's a rolling 14-day cycle.
Well, I think it's also those, it maybe will give us some guidance. So as we're ready to reopen, if we see that a building has maybe 6 or 8 or 10 cases and it's an elementary school, that's a large, that's a high volume. So perhaps that's a building that we may want to hold off on reopening. Whereas if we see maybe 6 at the high school, which is greater than 900, which I think was their largest categorization, that may not be the recommendation, or that may not be the directive or guidance that's being given by PD at this time. So I think it's it's just another data point or element that we would consider as our administration looks to move forward.
I think it could be looked at through another lens too, where you could say that, and some organizations, I'll say, have said this. For example, I believe the CDC, that school is a safer place. So if those numbers aren't happening and the transmission isn't happening in the schools and we're able to stay in a hybrid model, then that gives us that push to be able to do that. So perhaps this can be looked at from a number of different angles. I do have a question about that form, though. Does the board need to have a motion and vote on that, Mark, to have that signed, or no?
The form from PD does not give an indication that it has to be formally board approved. However, to the extent that the board wants to give the authority to Colleen and Dr. Gooden to sign on behalf of the board, recognizing that if your model is going to stay the blended learning model that was in place as of last week, then I think all you would have to do is give her the authority along with Dr. Gooden to sign the document. Doesn't need to be a formal vote per se, so much as acknowledging that she has the authority to sign this on behalf of the board of school directors.
So you get to sign it as board president, along with Dr. Gooden. One of the other comments that it does, and I'm sorry to not allow that to go forward for just a second, is that schools should consider altering schedule to significantly decrease number of students on site. So another thing that Dr. Gooden and the admin team can consider is if the numbers in a building even get to be a point that we had the option of maybe having less students come in that day, going to almost like to a hybrid of some sort in that sense. I'm not sure if that makes complete sense, but cutting back, we have students in K through 6 right now coming in 5 days a week. Instead of shutting down the building, saying, you know what, we're just going to have some of the students come in one day and some another day or something like that. I mean, these are things that, could be looked at as alternatives to completely shutting down.
I think that could be a scenario to explore if it needed to be, maybe at a later time. Mm-hmm.
That's not what that's about. We have to follow that. So if there's cases based on building size, if we hit those cases, the way I read it and understood it is, we hit those cases, then we will be required to close that building for a period of time. There isn't anything in there to readjust or realign the way we're doing a blended model. Because for us to now somewhere along the line switch gears again and try to now go to, at the elementary level, go to change everything around again, you're just creating more chaos. It's right, Mr. Fitzgerald. It doesn't seem like the way that's written. If we meet the criteria of those supposed cases, we have to close the building, correct?
Yes, I mean, yes, and I will say that I think one of the reasons that PDE put this out there was because I think districts were getting a little too flexible with this analysis for whether to close the school or not. This is to, frankly, save a district from themselves and say, here is what you are agreeing to do, no ifs, ands, or buts if you want to stay open. And here's the tables. So it kind of makes it easy. It's black and white at this point. And back to an original question I think Maggie had. As I've seen this in practice, when schools are open and somebody gets it at a club soccer game on a Saturday, or somebody gets it at a trick or treat party on a Friday night, that's where you're then going to be talking to the Department of Health saying, all right, so what do we now need to be thinking about with our buildings? I suspect, because it all goes back to then what's going on within your buildings. I suspect if you return on that December 7th date, what you're really doing is you're effectively have a clean slate at that point, because you haven't had kids in the building for 2+ weeks. And then it's going to be really monitoring if there is some level of community transmission, how that has impacted the school building based on those tables.
And in response to what you had said, the part that I said with the schools should consider altering schedule to significantly decrease number of students on site comes directly from the table on PDE for this. Which is something that we had not considered before. But it is, I think, in response to trying to, if you look at the little asterisk at the bottom, cut down the closure, the time, the number of days that the school would need to remain closed. If we can do some of these other things like that and cleaning areas and public health, it might avoid or cut back, on some of the number of days that we would have to stay closed.
I also have an additional question, if I may. Within, I guess, this attestation that Mrs. Zowski and Dr. Gooden need to sign, it does speak directly to taking temperatures of students and those sorts of things to make sure that we're doing the right thing, maintaining, a clean, safe, healthy environment, disinfecting, et cetera. But it does specifically state taking temperatures. Is that something that the district then is going to become obligated to do for every student that enters our building, or is relying on our families doing so sufficient? And how does that work?
Ms. Melton, could you just point me to where you see that in the attestation document?
I will. Let me find it again. If anybody has any other questions or comments in the meantime, I will find it.
I read that and I don't recall seeing anything about taking temperatures.
It was one of those where you follow the link and follow the link again and follow the link a third time. And when you get to that third link, that's where it said. So give me a second, please.
Can we let Mr. Rizzo continue while we look at this so you can finish?
Certainly, I was trying to look for that too. Mr. Rizzo, would you like to continue with your update?
Yeah, sure. So at this point, and again, we have some new metrics that we're going to be following, and we do need to kind of figure out what that's all going to look like in terms of how we conduct business here. At this point, our orders from Montgomery County Office of Public Health cease on Sunday, December 6th, as Monday, December 7th. At least at this point, our plan is to resume our in-person/hybrid model of instruction. And again, we are going to continue to monitor those numbers regularly. Dr. Gooden, I did get a chance to speak today, and he did authorize me to say that. The next part of this is we're going to get an update from our two nurses. I believe we have Trish Smith and Laura McNeil online. I'll turn it over to them in terms of where we are and how the first, I guess today would be, or the first 7 days of our opening. Ladies, turn it over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hello, board. Thank you for letting us present. Like all members of the Springford community, the nurses have found ourselves in a position we never could have imagined. Due to the increased spread of COVID-19 in our county and state, our local health departments are unable to keep up with the task of contact tracing in our schools. So instead, they are guiding our COVID liaisons in determining dates of isolation and quarantine, and the school nurses have become the contact tracers within our schools. We are still learning how to best operate in our new roles, but what follows are lessons that we have learned from this first week and a half at school with all of our students. Without social distancing, we will have close contacts for nearly every positive case in school. Dr. Gooden has presented at previous meetings that we cannot maintain 6 feet of distance between students in all of our classrooms and on all of our buses. While Springford is using all available space in our buildings to spread out as much as possible, we have had and will continue to have close contacts to positive cases in our schools. This does not indicate negligence on the part of our school or our community members. Due to the nature of COVID-19, infected people are contagious before they show symptoms. When a person becomes sick on a Wednesday, for instance, at school, we must remember that if they end up testing positive for COVID, they could have been spreading the virus Monday and Tuesday, which is 48 hours prior to the start of symptoms. This is where the importance of our other efforts to prevent viral spread come in. Every time we stay home when we're ill, every time we wear our masks or wash our hands and do our best to physically distance from others, we are helping to prevent the transmission in our schools. As healthcare workers in the pandemic, we're not at all surprised to see positive cases in our schools. Schools are an extension of the community at large, so any increase in cases out in the community will have an effect on our staff and students. With each positive case that we're informed of, we work as efficiently as possible to notify everyone who was a close contact in school. We count on the person who tests positive to be forthright about any close contacts. We count on seating charts in all the classrooms and on the buses. We count on accurate reporting from anyone who visited or observed a classroom. And we count on every member of the community to do their part to stay away from others as much as possible. Contact tracing has proven to be a time-consuming process, not only because of the extensive amount of data we collect, but also due to the emotional nature of the conversations when we notify our close contacts. Despite what we all believe we know about COVID, it's a different story when you are being told that you're positive, or your child was exposed, or that you need to quarantine, and that the next 14 days of education will look completely different. It becomes personal. The personal nature of all of this is why there's such a fine line between maintaining the ill person's privacy while also notifying anyone who needs to know for their own personal safety. Rumors will spread since there is fear and confusion around all of this, but our goal is to offer emotional support and guidance with every positive case and close contact. Yet we must inform people based on science, which means that we cannot react to mere symptoms, but we must wait until we have a diagnosis to begin this process. We then must collect information from a person who is potentially very ill, who is probably scared, and who may be having a difficult time recalling recent history at that moment. So again, the process takes time. The frustration and fear of our community is real and evident. Most of the nurses not only work for Springford, but live here as well. And this is as real to us as it is to you. Although you may not be aware of each and every case, please be mindful that aside from our weekly pandemic updates, we will continue to notify families intimately involved with any positive case as soon as possible. We appreciate your patience as we continue to follow best practice for accurate reporting. And we appreciate when you contact your school nurse or your COVID liaison with any questions, rather than making assumptions or trusting everything that you hear in the community. We have always cared for the health and safety of our students and staff, and we ask you to trust that we are continuing to do so. Meanwhile, please continue to do your part by wearing your masks, washing your hands, and keeping your distance from others. The only way through this is together. Thank you.
Thank you, Trish. I would just add one more. We know that we are embarking on our holiday break, and some people will be traveling. And we do remind you that Secretary Levine did put that little 2-week quarantine or 72 hours of a negative COVID test. So just keep that in mind when you're traveling and you're returning, just to kind of help support. Questions for the nurses at all before I move on?
I just thank them for that
Yeah.
update. Yes, thank you for that.
And as of last week, just as an aside, Chief Boyer, Aaron Crew, Trish Smith, Laura McNeil, and I are going to meet weekly just to talk about our processes, our communication. We report out to our leadership team. We report out to our cabinet team in terms of how we do things, just to make sure that we're as efficient as possible and as thorough as possible. Technology, a couple of quick updates with technology. Staff and temporary tech support have been strategically located in all of our buildings to provide real-time support. Canvas, Zoom, and other technology is in place to support all three environments, virtual, cyber, or in-person instruction. New student schedules. Last meeting, we were getting ready to hop into the second quarter. We did, and one of the big finger cross moments was, did everybody switch over to the new schedules, new teachers, new everything in the second quarter, and that happened flawlessly. I want to thank the tech team for helping to make that happen. We had our deadline and our building principals for their hard work and making sure the building schedules got where they needed to be. We had our schedules kind of set on that Monday, whatever date that was, the 9th, and they had 2 days to work in the sandbox, which is just to run a bunch of tests to make sure that things ran smoothly. And as of Thursday morning, the 12th, it went off without a hitch. So kudos to them for all their work in making that happen. That could have been a really big deal, and it ended up being a very smooth transition. School police officers, we continue to be thankful for. They've been managing traffic, which has proven to be a bit of a challenge. They start their morning at the high school, and then they move over to the 567. It is getting better, but there's still a lot. At the 567 alone, there's 300 to 400 vehicles dropping off students daily. You can imagine on South Lewis Road, that creates a bit of a stir. But they are happy to report that a parent wait time for picking up or dropping off their child is about 10 to 15 minutes. So not too terribly bad considering the volume of cars coming in. One of the other things we want to make sure we touch base with you on is staffing and shortages. I know some questions have come up. Despite the pandemic, the district staff attendance from November 12th to the 20th is better than it was compared to the same period last year. We're averaging about 65 absences now, where last year at this time it was more like 97 across the entire district. Ms. Lease, Dr. Murray, and Mr. Catalano have trained virtual substitutes to fill in case we have a K-6 virtual sub teacher that's unable to work. So we have trained subs specifically to help in that virtual environment. FERCA is set to sunset the end of this year, and then staff that are on leave currently for childcare or COVID-related reasons would be returning after the winter break, which will help us continue to provide instruction to our students. And then other strategies that we're using when we have what we call a sub failure. And a sub failure is not when a sub fails. A sub failure is whenever we cannot get enough subs to cover a position. So some things we put in place. The first thing our building principals do is contact other buildings to make sure that they don't have any extra substitutes that they could send or they can tweak things. We use specialists, art, music, library, PE, RamQuest. We'll use specialists to cover classes. We'll use reading specialists. We'll use IST teachers. We use school counselors. We'll use certified instructional assistants. Building principals will cover. We will use our instructional coaches, and we will use certified central office staff. So don't be surprised if Dr. Gooden or I are teaching in a classroom somewhere. Others, we combine classes into a large area where students could spread out a little bit, be that the library, the gym, media center, etc. This could include in-person and virtual as well. And one of the things that our principals are doing is they're seeing this as a menu of options, so they don't go to just one move. They'll switch things around to minimize the disruption as much as possible. Teachers teach virtually. Sometimes a teacher could teach virtually and have a non-certified person monitor the students while in the room. And I got to say, a lot of this I got from Ms. Lease. Our teachers and principals have been doing fantastic at keeping this running as smoothly as possible. It is not an easy environment. We have multiple environments going on at the same time, and they've been navigating it quite well. So I want to say thank you to them. And that's really all I have for an update, unless there are questions.
I just have a couple. What about busing? Has that been okay?
Busing has been okay, yes. We got things up and running. It's been going smoothly. The routes were all done. Ms. Sanderson and her crew have done a pretty tremendous job of getting everything up and going. We have our blues and we have our golds for grades 7 to 12. That's all gone very, very well.
Okay, and what about an update on, and this may not be yet decided, but on the keystones, did I see something that there's a potential possibility that that may not happen yet, but I don't know if that's
Yeah, I have
already
that in my
approved.
report. The legislative report.
You have that in your report. Okay. We can wait on that then. And so going back to that form to be signed as part of Mr. Rizzo's presentation here, is there a board agreement for me to sign that, or where are we on that? I don't think that was finished. And did you find, Christina, what you were looking for?
Yeah, it was the more generalized. So it said in other mitigating, that you agree to, that we are enforcing other mitigating orders. And it was in the other mitigating orders where it was, and really more kind of in the general, like businesses and that kind of thing. So I don't think, because they spiked out the schools separately, I don't think that
Okay,
it does apply.
Just wanted to make sure we were clear. So is it the board's agreement to sign the form?
I'm okay with it.
I'm in agreement with you and Dr. Gooden taking a look at it. And if you feel that you can meet the requirements of it, signing it. But if you feel that this is something that where it's questionable whether we can meet this, then I think that's when it needs to come back to us to have a discussion.
I don't think there was anything new in it. I think it's everything we're already meeting as far as what I saw.
Sure, put your signature on it. Go ahead.
I know nothing later on. That's all. That's my story and sticking to it.
Oh, no.
Mrs. Zowski, it's due on November 30th, so I would just encourage you to speak with Mr. Rizzo and Dr. Gooden, just to make sure everybody's on the same page with the ability to fulfill it, and then it's submitted by the 30th. It was just a timing disaster for every district that this came out on the Monday before Thanksgiving, and it has to be done by early next week.
That's fine. I can sign on the 30th, Ms. Fern.
Ms. Fern,
After
for the
we
meeting
talk.
minutes, I stepped out right before.
He did not.
I have a couple questions for Mr. Rizzo. So like anything else, there's always the rumor mills or concerns within the district. And, I'm hearing over and over that there's a lot of questions or concerns related to our cleaning policies. And there's a belief that, that we're not sticking through to our cleaning processes and procedures. Desks aren't being wiped down, rooms aren't being cleaned. Students aren't, I see hand sanitizers all over the place, but students aren't being encouraged to use them. The desks in the cafeterias, the desks aren't being wiped down in between lunches. I mean, I take everything with a grain of salt, but again, if I keep hearing certain things, I start to get a little bit of concern. And I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to speak towards that.
Well, I spoke with Mr. Hunter today. He did speak in great detail about the efforts that they're doing to
You
clean
speak to who?
spaces.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Hunter? Yep. I spoke to Mr. Hunter today, in fact, just to talk about the efforts they're putting into making sure our surfaces are clean. Always good to set a reminder out and making sure we're following our protocols that have been clearly established on our health and safety plan for sure. But yeah, I mean, Mr. Hunter and I spoke today about our regular daily cleaning is on par with what most districts would consider a deep clean. We have an additional layer of misting in a classroom that we put in place when we do have to do a deep cleaning based on an identified COVID case. But each and every night, our cleaning would meet the standards of other districts in their deep cleaning. So I feel confident that our process that we have in place is thorough enough. And Mr. Hunter does go through and he does do checks. He does random checks to make sure that surfaces are with that new meter thing that he has that's going through and making sure that our surfaces are meeting standard. Mr. Jackson?
I'd like to add to that, just for Mr. Bello. We've implemented a QA program, which is quality control and quality assurance, which I'll talk about in property that addresses cleaning. Okay.
Again, like I said, I listen, and I think that it's important that when we hear things that we bring it up and we reassure that, our cleaning protocols are being followed. I mean, as far as, in the cafeteria, I know that seems to be a concern now in between lunch periods, are the all the individuals' desks being wiped down or cleaned. If students leave a classroom and a new group is coming in a little later, are those desks cleaned beforehand, or how are we managing that? So we just need to make sure that as a district, we're reassuring parents that we are following. And I know Mr. Jackson was going to talk about some other things that Mr. Hunter, and you just referred to it a little bit, that we are following our cleaning protocols because it's important for us to reassure the parents.
Fair enough. Reminders are never a bad thing.
Right. And then my next question is that there seems to be questions around, so, I mean, it's been pretty much everywhere that we've had a teacher recently test positive in the district. And the questions are basically, and I don't want to get into specifics. I don't want to get into specifics of the teacher. I don't want to get into specifics of the school or anything like that. I'm talking at the 100,000-foot level. What is our protocol when a teacher in the district tests positive and they've had students in the classroom?
The protocol is much the same as it would be if it were a student. We identify close contacts that the teacher, if they're identified or if they're what is called probable positive, they reach out to the school nurse and they reach out to the COVID liaison. Contacts, close contacts are identified. They're notified. We do not notify the entire classroom. We don't notify entire buildings. We notify those that are involved, as Ms. Smith alluded to. That's a little uncomfortable for some of our families, but it is the process that we put in place and we've been trying to adhere to.
Yeah, and I think it's we're following the contact tracing protocols that have been established by the county as well with contact tracing.
That's correct. We work closely with the county on that, yes.
So the county doesn't encourage, do they not encourage us to notify everyone in the classroom if a teacher tests positive, or is it strictly focused on contact tracing within meeting the criteria of that you have to be within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, that whole process?
We are following the contact tracing guidelines, 15 minutes, 15 continuous minutes. Correct. Less than 6 feet. That's correct.
So again, I just wanted to, because there are, like everything else, parents, when they hear that we potentially could have a teacher that tests positive, they get concerned with their students that are in the classroom. But from our perspective, we're doing everything that we're required to do, and we're making sure all the safety protocols are followed.
That's correct.
Was it ever discussed to think about it? Does it make sense to notify an entire classroom or not?
Internally, we've had quite a few discussions about that, and it surrounded, part of it was HIPAA, FERPA, and causing undue anxiety to families and to our community, that we wanted to keep it to the close contacts, those who were most immediately possibly affected or impacted.
Do we know what other schools are doing as far as when a teacher tests positive? And do we have an inside, or do they notify the entire classroom, or are they doing very similar to what we're doing? Do we know?
Just from my experience, they would be doing it what you were doing. They would be working with either the state Department of Health, or in this case, the county, identifying the individuals who would meet the close contact criteria and identifying those individuals. Some districts have expanded that to include near contacts, where they would say just monitor your child or whomever. But for the most part, I'd say 80-90% of the districts are just adhering to how the Department of Health is indicating we should notify individuals.
Okay, well, and again, I think it's important that we continually reinforce what we're doing, because it like Ms. Smith said, that we're going to see positive cases, and we need to make sure that we are keep communicating out. These are our protocols. These are our cleaning protocols. But we should think that we may think differently as far as comparing what happens if the teacher's at secondary versus elementary. I don't know. But we may want to think about if an elementary school teacher tests positive, do we notify everyone in the class to monitor their students, or I don't know. It's just something to think about. Which leads me to my next question of, if a student is coming to school and they're sick, just cold or flu or whatever, not COVID, they're sick, right? Or not feeling well. They don't come in for the day, but attend their classes virtually. Is that marked as an absent or not?
So right now, they are being marked as absent depending upon the building. That is not our practice moving forward. So our practice moving forward is we work with Joe Mayo, who's our Skyward guru, and he is adding a virtual attended button. So whenever teachers log in, the teachers haven't heard about this yet because it's like brand new. But right now, whenever you log in as a teacher, you see present, tardy, absent, and that's it. And they select one of those options. There will be a fourth option that is attended virtually, which means they should have been in the building and they attended virtually. They're not in the building, but they're marked present. That way, if we have to go back and do contact tracing and checking attendance, we know who was physically in the space versus who was in attendance, but not physically in attendance.
Okay, so that's good to know then, that they won't miss the school if they're attending all their classes virtually, because we're encouraging students that if they're not feeling well, not to come in, but we don't want to then say, well, now you're not come in and you attend the classes virtually, we're still going to mark you absent. So it makes sense to do that.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's on my list of things here, and it's something I've discussed with Mr. Rizzo at length, because a number of emails have come over where kids who normally would have gone to school have a cold, and because of that, they are encouraged to stay home, but up to this point have been marked absent. And I think Mr. Rizzo knows that I wasn't comfortable with that. I did have a board president meeting last night and did get a gauge or a temperature for the area school districts, and they are not marking them absent. So I'm glad to hear that that correction for the past will be made, and moving forward, that they will not be marked absent. Thank you.
So based on that, there still seems to be a lot of hoopla around these Wednesdays. I'm like to the point where just cancel Wednesdays, because it seems like we're like, we got some teachers are doing one thing, other teachers, and there seems to be this constant confusion around Wednesdays. So, or maybe we should have everybody do, I don't know. I don't know why, I don't know what's going on, why there seems to be confusion. I've seen some of the videos that were put up, but I think the biggest confusion is, although we're saying one thing, I think what parents are saying is that there's not consistency around what Wednesdays are.
Well, as you know, it is a 7 to 12 issue now because K to 6 is in 5 days a week. So we can narrow down and work with those principals to make sure we send a clear message out. We do want to be as consistent as possible, but we do want to allow, as you've mentioned before, the teachers to expand on the art of teaching, whether it be virtually or in person. So agreed. We will share the information. I will make sure the building principals communicate clearly what that looks like for them. And I'll work with Dr. Murray on what language we use for that.
Yeah, because either there's the lowest denominator of what teachers need to do no matter what, compared to what's the most that teachers will do on Wednesday, and that sets an expectation. And then if a teacher doesn't do that, then parents feel like, so maybe there's a common low denominator, like the common lowest, no matter what, the teacher has to do this on Wednesdays, all teachers. And anything they do beyond that falls into the teacher's plan for the week. Because again, I don't want to get into that whole telling teachers what they should and shouldn't do, but I just want to get us past this confusion on Wednesdays, which then leads to the last point, that I'm hearing that there's this potentially, again, I take everything with a grain of salt. I'm just reporting back things that I'm continually hearing. And I'm hearing that there's instances where teachers are, from a virtual standpoint, teachers are like, they're joining in virtually for like a very short period of time, and then those kids are getting knocked off and say, okay, we're done for the day, virtually or whatever. So and this was my concern all along when I brought this up, and I want to make sure that we have some type of monitoring in place to make sure that we don't have this constant, the kids that aren't getting the same level of attention and education that are virtual versus in class. And that's, I'm hearing, again, I'm taking everything with a grain of salt, but I think it's very important that we are confident that we don't have that happening on a regular basis.
So maybe you and I could talk afterwards. I can get a little more specifics about that, because K to 6 virtual is a dedicated virtual teacher. 7 to 12 is a different story. So let's talk offline about that, and I'll see what, okay? Thanks.
I got one item, Mr. Rizzo, I'm just gonna add on to Mr. DeBello. I brought it up in curriculum and similar questions, emails. Cameras required to be on or off?
We are not requiring cameras to be on at this point.
So no kid should be penalized for not having their camera on?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a follow-up question to one of Mr. DeBello's comments. And again, this is just information that's reported. It's not that we understand it to be necessarily true, but something to ask about. You had talked about the staffing and ways to manage any kind of shortages or substitutes. Is there any combining of classes going on? Because that would definitely take the wind out of the sail as far as splitting classes up or having smaller numbers, and then to potentially combine a class would put more kids in a classroom closer together, theoretically.
Sure. So here's what I would say to that. I don't know what's happening in every single building all the time. I don't know how they're covering things. There was a menu of options that I did read to you. Is combining classrooms an option? It's one of the options. I don't know that they would combine classrooms in the same small space, because then that would make our not completely socially distanced much less socially distanced. Again, I alluded to that in here, where they would go to a larger space so they could still be spread out. So is it happening? I don't know that it is. I know there was one instance where there was a virtual class and an in-person class combined to solve a problem. Not ideal, but also not a long-term solution. It was a short-term fix. So again, I go back to our teachers and our building principals are really working very hard to be as creative and proactive as they can to make sure that we can keep the shop open.
All right, thank you for that. Are there any other questions for Mr. Rizzo on his update?
Yeah, I guess it's probably the elephant in the room. And as Mr. DeBello has said, rumors and concerns and anxieties around many of our community members' families. So as we get to December 7th, and certainly with numbers increasing and new guidance and all of these things, I guess one thing I would like to better understand is, what is the communication strategy if for any reason we do need to remain in a virtual setting come December 7th? When would a decision be made? How would it be communicated to families? Those sorts of things, because I think, it's something we just started to get folks, our students back into the buildings, and, and then we're faced with this, extended time out. So it's the back and forth is concerning. And so what are we looking at, and how can people expect to be notified, and how is that decision going to be made? Who's going to make that decision? What is that process?
So some of this is a little bit out of our control, because we do work directly with Montgomery County Office of Public Health in terms of what that means. And there are new metrics that we just found out about today. So I can't speak to exactly what exactly would be needed or when that would be determined. But I do know that we would stay in communication, obviously, with the board. We would stay in communication with the Montgomery County Office of Public Health. They would work with us on that, and we would update our families as soon as we had any clear direction on which way we were going to go. It's probably not going to happen tomorrow. But I would imagine there's going to be a lot of conversations happening next week as we look at our updated numbers. We see where things are. We see what the impact is of maybe even people being over break. A lot of wind in sails was let out whenever we found out we were going to be shut. I say shut down whenever we were going to be mandated to go virtual for 2 weeks. And for us, it was a minimal impact because it was really only 1 week of instruction for our students. But if we're going to go back and, where our plan right now is to go back, in our current plan on December 7th, we've got to continue to look at the data. We've been encouraged by the board as well as by the community to make sure that we're looking at the data. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're committed to.
And if we have family members who are not comfortable with returning to the building, so they have opted to return to the building during the second marking period, but the numbers certainly are increasing. And if they continue in the trajectory that they're currently at, it certainly may be a concern. Are there things that our families can do, whether move a child to a virtual setting as opposed to in person and those kinds of things? And what would that process be? I just want to make sure our families understand that we're not wiping our hands clean of this, and just because there's a break right now and we're going to be virtual next week, we're not going to, stop looking at it and not pay attention, and that we have a focus on trying to make sure that we're serving all of our students as best we can.
Sure. And just if I could speak to that quickly and kind of joking towards Mr. Jackson a little bit, there was a time when everything used to be a simple question, and they're just not simple questions anymore. Right now, it's more about it's more about what's the impact. So if we have and believe me, we want to make as many families as possible happy as we can. We want them to be comfortable. That's why we provide Springford Cyber and virtual, and we provide all those options so parents can make a choice. If we move more towards virtual, we are increasing our virtual class sizes, which could end up being that we have to shift or we have to do this or oversized classes. So everything has everything has an equal and opposite reaction. Every reaction has an equal and opposite reaction. So we've got to weigh those out and see. But I would encourage any families that are unsure to contact their building principal, start that discussion, and we'll see what options we have.
I mean, we also have a lot of different information coming out from the county. The county is going to convene on December 2nd, and maybe we'll have some updated data at that point in time that we can take and move forward with.
I have a question related to Clinton's comment. I'm at a loss, and this is one parent comment that I received, on with no cameras on, how do the teachers know that the student is participating, interacting, or just sitting back? And this came up because it was time to do some student assessments. And, it was some issues on having particular assignments or interaction in class. And the teacher said, well, I don't know if they were or not because the cameras are off. I'm at a loss for that. I mean, what do you say to the parent? What do you say to the teacher? How can the teacher even give adequate feedback back to the parent if the kids don't have their cameras on and don't know if they're interacting or participating? Is it because they're lost, they're just not saying something, or they've just disengaged themselves? And I know it's a touchy subject because of some things that have been seen and all that, but somebody help me out because I don't know how to respond to this parent.
Well, simply at any time you could say to a parent that's unsure, reach out to your building principal and have that discussion with them because the building principals are involved with all of those. It comes down to, there's a lot of ways to measure engagement. Of course, one of the easiest ways is to see exactly what they're doing. And I'm certainly not opposed to kids having cameras on. I do know that there are some situations that make things a little more challenging when everybody has a camera on. There is also, if you're going to make it happen, what is going to be the recourse if they just refuse? And those are some discussions that we have. But it comes down to submission of assignments. It comes down to, are they participating in any chats that are going on? If they're doing any kind of small group breakout sessions, are they participating in that? And I have 4 children in the district, and 2 of them all 4 of them are willing to have their cameras on, but some of them don't because nobody else does. But I leave it up to the teacher to deal with some of those difficult discussions. And whenever they're seeing a bunch of empty screens because all they see are names, I would expect that there's some level of oversight and communication between the teacher and the family, or the teacher and the student, to say, hey, I'm not seeing you there. Are you getting this? Aren't you getting this? I know our teachers are top notch, and our teachers are doing everything they can to try and engage. Is it an issue? I'm not 100% certain. Are less students engaged than if they were to be there following, I forget what the acronym stood for, but the slant method, which means if you can sit there and you can look engaged, but you're really not engaged
Right.
whenever you're in person. So I think there's a lot of layers to it, and our building principals and our classroom teachers, I think, are doing a very nice job of working through that. I don't know that we got everybody right now, but I think we're doing a pretty good job. We're in day 2 of 3 days of parent teacher conferences, and I'm hearing some good things in terms of communications with families. So I don't have a direct answer for you on that one. If the board is interested in something along those lines, we can have that discussion at the district level. I don't know that we're ready to go down that road just yet, but we certainly continually evaluate and reevaluate our practices to do what's best for kids.
Right, and I'm certainly not saying, I'm not laying fault anywhere.
Sure.
It's just how do you answer? Because it's a difficult question, because of the privacy and all that, but
Those are the kinds of questions typically, like often when I get them, I'll send them either to, to the principal or to, if it's a special ed related question to, the special ed supervisor for that age group, or to Mr. Rizzo if it's a cyber charter, so depending on what the context is, I certainly can offer, my concern or my perspective, but I try to get the person who would know the most and be able to give them more. They don't care, often people want to know what's happening with their child. And so speaking to the teacher, speaking to their principal is helpful. And we can help give them kind of a global perspective. That's not our intent for students to be disengaged, right? But the individual teacher or principal could help.
Well, like I said, my comment comes down to you don't know if they are or they are not engaged. I'm not saying the student wasn't engaged. I'm not saying that there could have been an issue, but when Clinton brought it up, it reminded me about that comment, and now I have some more information.
Yeah, you or I might not know, but I bet that teacher does. And I would just say further what Ms. Melton said, if you're unsure who to find out that question to, send it to me and I'll make sure it gets to the right person.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for all the comments and questions for Mr. Rizzo.
I have a quick comment. I was going to wait till board comment, but I'm going to say it now since we're hot on the topics. After thinking about it, and my concern is knowing that Montgomery County is behind schedule with contact tracing and all that. I think I'm going to encourage the district, at least at the elementary school level, that if we have a teacher test positive, my feeling and recommendation is that we should notify all the families in that class.
I agree.
I'm just concerned that with the kids being young and that I'm concerned about all the students, but I think that because the students are with the teacher longer throughout the day compared to students at the secondary level, it's less of an impact. But my recommendation, like I said, I'm only speaking for myself, but I think that we should notify all the students in the class that the teacher is tested positive and that they should watch for symptoms and give guidance. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody needs to, I don't want to send panic across the room as well, but I think with proper communication, good guidance and oversight, I think that it would be a better approach than sticking strictly to the contact tracing protocols. And I don't want to be said that, I don't care about the older kids. I do. I'm just saying from an elementary school that they're with the students longer throughout the day compared to teachers. So there would be less of a situation where the teachers, or maybe we just notify all students in the class when a teacher tests positive. I think more communication is better than not. That's just my opinion.
I would agree with that and say that I think that it perhaps should be across the board. I agree that the elementary schools, that was part of the reason that we said we could go back and give the option for the all in person, because they are smaller cohorts, but they also are together all day long. But even at the high school, they are together for what, 45-minute period when they're in there. That's longer than 15 minutes. And we know that the 6-foot social distancing in most cases is not being met, as we've heard from Dr. Gooden, as we heard from Trish tonight, and as we've all read in the emails that we've received. So I would agree with Mr. DeBello.
If it's a HIPAA issue, would it be possible to just let the parents know that your child may have been exposed to someone who's been tested positive and not identify that it was your teacher? I mean, they'd get the same information and be told to be on the lookout for symptoms, but you wouldn't have to identify the source.
Well, I'm not sure it's a HIPAA issue. And I do think that there needs to be some credibility to the correspondence that if we've identified an individual within a classroom, that there may be a need for a little bit more facts to make sure that parents are fully informed of what's going on. I would encourage if we're going to take this approach that that certainly there would be a communication for individuals that are clearly in close contact and they have one specific set of communication, because that triggers, in my opinion, the possible need for those individual students or staff, whatever the case may be, to quarantine. However, if we have students or staff that we don't think had the close contact, but we're sending them an advisory notice, I mean, that triggers something different. They could potentially still come back to school the next day. We're just saying to the parents, hey, this is an FYI for you, and please just be on the lookout for any possible symptoms. Because we want to balance the desire to inform, but also we don't want to incite, panic. So that's probably why I would suggest having two forms of communication if we're looking at a class as a whole.
And I'm fine with that. And that's what I was saying, it's proper communication. So you might have two types of communication based on the students that are directly impacted versus the ones that are in the class. And I haven't seen, where it's published, but where do we give, because I know other school districts do it, like, are we given like weekly updates? I know we talked about it, but where would parents find the weekly updates of test cases within the district?
That's in the Wednesday weekly update.
Yeah.
To all the parents?
Yes, correct.
So, okay, so I just want to make sure again that information is getting out there.
Aaron is on the call. Aaron, do you want to provide further information on how we're communicating?
Sure, that information goes out every Wednesday in weekly update. That goes to all parents, all staff members and employees, as well as all school board members. And it's also posted to the website. It is on every school page, and there is an entire weekly update archive on the website as well. And that weekly update includes our county transmission level, so both for Montgomery County and Chester County. So the low, medium, moderate, or substantial. The number of new confirmed cases within the past 7 days in all of our townships and boroughs, as well as the total confirmed numbers of cases in our schools, both employee and student. And that is one consolidated number total.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that people understand that information is going out.
Mr. Fitzgerald, I just got a little clarification. So if we're going to announce to a classroom that their teacher has COVID, that's not a violation?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily the teacher. It could be anybody in the class is what I'm getting the sense of, that the teacher's just one example. It could be a student too. So we wouldn't necessarily have to identify the person per se, so much as saying that we believe you are in close contact with somebody. Now, would that probably result in them realizing, oh, your teacher hasn't been there for the last few days, or so-and-so, Johnny wasn't there. Yeah, people are going to be able to deduce that. We're not going to give names, but we have to give enough information for people to be fully informed. And we can work on that communication.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, follow up. I think that's a great idea. Try to keep it simple here, I think, and not be, decisive, because I think it should go the other way to make sure that a teacher's informed in the same capacity, right? So it should be one communication that covers this all, that doesn't incite sort of a panic too, but it's just to be on top of this. And I think this is a great discussion to have, and look forward to that.
I have one other point on that too, is out of the whole classroom, parents may be concerned because unbeknownst to us, a child in that classroom could have a medical issue that may make them more susceptible. So I think that the parent should know that there's a possibility of exposure and what to look out for. And you know, there's perfectly healthy kids, but there are kids in classrooms that could have a higher degree of susceptibility.
Okay. Thank you all again for your comments and questions and conversation around Mr. Rizzo's report. Moving on to board and committee reports. I would ask anyone that is giving a report this evening to just be conscious of their time and potentially be brief where possible, because we still have an agenda full of items to get to. And with that, Ishika and Allison, do you have a student rep report this evening?
Yes, we do. So this is the November student report. So what happened? Thanksgiving break, which we're currently on, from November 21st to November 29th. Monco decided that schools will be virtual until December 6th. The National Honor Society inducted several new members this past spring. Students' pictures were taken during school on November 18th, 19th, and 20th for the high school. A senior gathering happened on November 18th. Approximately 285 seniors signed up to participate, which was held on November 18th at the Coach McKinley Stadium. Seniors had a class picture taken, then assembled on the field in the formation of 2021 in honor of class of 2021. Breakfast items were available for grab and go at the conclusion of the event, and we would like to say a big thank you to class advisors and administration for planning the event. There's a video, so I think it's a few minutes long if you guys are okay with that. Just press the link.
That's not a piece we want to skip over.
Okay, while that loads, I'll go on. We had the end of marking period 1 on November 11th and the start of marking period 2.
My understanding during this was that my understanding is that there were seniors that kept coming on the scene, so it took a little while to get the 2021 done, and it was a little chilly, but I appreciate them doing that. How many seniors did you end up having altogether?
A little over 200, I believe. I think 250, but I'm not sure of the exact number. It was definitely a little chilly, yeah.
I think it was 285 was the number of seniors around there.
Yeah, I think that's the amount that signed up. I don't know how many total and came because a lot of it's, I think some ditched out because of the weather. It was very cold.
It was very cold.
It was very cold. Hybrid started, students were back in school who signed up. Grades 7 to 9 went back November 12th, and then grades 10 to 12, November 16th. There was a Camp Kindness food drive with Limerick Elementary. Letters to the troops at Spring City Elementary, marching band / senior and parent night on October 24th, Kutztown Instant Decision Day for seniors on November 4th, Unity Day hosted by Oaks Elementary School on October 21st, high school building tours on November 4th, and then grades 1 through 4 virtual parent-teacher conference for Royersford Elementary on November 19th. And in the next slide, that is the 2021 class picture that we took. That was via drone.
So these are the items that are coming up in the near future. Winter sports will resume on December 7th, and picture retakes will take place December 17th and December 18th at the high school, and students can sign up for those in their house offices. Winter break will commence on December 23rd, and classes will resume on January 3rd. Parent-teacher conferences are taking place today and tomorrow. The Future Planning Center is holding a selective college admission presentation on December 2nd at 2:30 p.m. Picture retakes for Royersford Elementary School are on December 2nd. The Home and School California Tortilla fundraiser at Spring City Elementary will take place on December 3rd. ACT testing at the Springboard 1012 Center will take place on December 12th. There will be an online winter concert for viewing on December 15th. Picture retakes at Limerick Elementary School will take place on December 16th. There will be no school on January 18th, and there will be a faculty recital night on January 17th. The Future Planning Center will also hold a presentation for parents of junior students on January 20th. There will be a winter guard show on January 23rd and an advanced placement and dual enrollment information night on January 27th.
Glad to see so many things are planned even while we're still in the midst of that. Okay, so moving on to policy, that would be me. Policy committee met. We met on Monday, November 16th, and we reviewed a number of policies. You'll see many on the agenda tonight under new business. I do want to bring your attention, as I said, back to the attendance issue. At this point, the attendance is on the agenda for a first read tonight. The committee, I guess the policy committee, is looking forward to seeing the administrative guidelines once those are complete. That won't alter the policy per se. So that is one of those pieces where we think we will see that change from being marked absent to being virtually present. Is that correct, Mr. Rizzo? Yes. Oh, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and then also with that, currently, you are able to email your excuse, which is a written form, as long as it comes from an email that's registered with Skyward. I've asked Mr. Rizzo to send out a communication to the parents to that effect. I believe it has gone out to the building principals, but as a parent myself, I have not seen that communication come out. So I've asked him to specifically be sure that communication, that it is okay to send an email from a registered email address with Skyward for an absence to be excused. So that would be the next piece of that we're looking for. Adult education is also on for a first read tonight, along with a host of others that have gone to, I believe they have gone to the solicitor at this point and are here for a first read. One of the requests that has been made by one of our board members is to, when we have these on for a first read, that it would be appropriate to share perhaps in a board memo the draft of what has changed in the policy going forward, so that each board member can look at that and see what the changes are, and then in the second reading, have the clean copy to be able to make that decision. But it is difficult. Some of these policies are much longer than others, and it would be very helpful to share the information of what specifically is changing in the policy, perhaps, by highlighting the changes or something like that for the board members to look at that in the board memo prior. So we reviewed a number more. We continue to go through these on our refresh plan. that was to start over the summer. It was a little bit sidetracked, but we're on it now. And we will meet again in January. That time is to be determined based on how things continue to shake out. That is a brief version. There are a number of policies here that I could go into detail on, but that, as I said, is a brief version. And the policy minutes are uploaded to the website for further information. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, moving on then to the next piece. We have Linda with Curriculum and Technology. Linda, are you able to give us a report?
I'm here. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Curriculum and Technology Committee meeting met on Monday, November 16th at 7:30 p.m. Dr. Murray provided several updates. The first was on a November 24th Professional Development Day. Teachers met and got training. They also shared a lot of information about new instructional techniques being used virtually and in person. They shared best practices about the virtual teaching and the new technology that they'd been using. And I think it was largely successful. She provided an overview of Act 35, which is the civics assessment requirement for Pennsylvania education. We will be providing a civics assessment and curriculum in 11th grade for all students. And the US Citizens Test will be used for that assessment starting this school year in January 2021. Dr. Murray also discussed the reopening of K through 6 and 7 through 12. As previously discussed, she talked a lot about the largest challenge being the substitute teachers. I think we kind of covered all of that. She talked about how they were using the entire sort of toolbox, the curriculum department, even administrators and all resources available, and working with HR to address this and triaging it every day and working it out. She also talked about receiving feedback from the public. Erin Crew has developed a suggestion box that anybody can visit on the website to provide your feedback to what is working, what isn't working, and give information. And the curriculum department is making sure that that goes to the proper person to be addressed. So please look into that. She also talked about a RAM chat that is available on the website to talk about Wednesdays. So perhaps parents who are still confused about Wednesdays can listen to the RAM chat and get some more direction. Then Bob Catalano talked about the technology department. He talked about how his team met with all of the teachers 7 through 12 to set up in-class technology for the return to in-person learning. And they troubleshooted with each teacher, did a test run. I also wanted to just also give my kudos to the technology team who rolled out a different schedule for the district in 2-week time period, which was an amazing effort. Also, Mr. Rizzo had talked about that. That was really amazing how they simulated it in a sandbox beforehand, worked through all the issues, and then put it into place with quite a success. This is a project that's usually done over the summer, over a 3-month period of time, with more people than he has now because he's lost a large portion of his staff. And this was done in 2 weeks. And usually when they do it over the summer, also school is shut down, and they put it into place while the whole operation was already going on. So that's why they had the sandbox. So I want to just say that that's an amazing task done in a very short amount of time. And we should really recognize it as just a really incredible success for his department. Currently, he has 8 temps who helped get that set up and have gotten us through a lot of the technology issues. On the agenda tonight, he's asking for another payment to be approved for this team to help him out into 2021. Actually, let me find my phone here for the rest of my notes. Let's see. So another thing he talked about is an agreement between Springford School District and an employee, Kathleen Cox, who was our software consultant or our software IT person. She has retired, and he, because of all the technology requirements, he was unable to train her replacement. So he's asking for 150 hours of consulting services at a rate of $50 per hour. Funding would come from the technology budget and should not exceed $7,500. That was because she didn't have time to train before she retired, and that's required for the technology to keep the software IT running seamlessly. IT is also looking at an agreement with EBS of Media for the IT consultants, and this is what I talked about before, and this is to extend to June 1st of 2021. And that's coming from the unassigned fund balance and shall not exceed $20,200. Also on the budget tonight, or on the agenda, Technology is recommending the purchase of the NAC, the Network Access Controller.
Linda, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We did amend that in the beginning. We did amend that. We're going to hold that off until January.
Okay, that part that didn't come across on the computer, I didn't hear it. Sorry.
Oh, I'm
Very beginning of the
sorry.
meeting. No problem. So that was C?
Yes, I believe.
Okay, and then they're also recommending the approval of a 3-year subscription to Docuware, which is used for indexing software and storage solutions. The cost of this project is $35,000 with a monthly software subscription of $425 per month. So that's all I have. The next meeting will be in January. We don't have a date for that yet, but that will be forthcoming after we do our reorg. And are there any questions?
Okay, thank you, Linda. And Tom, finance?
As mentioned earlier, finance did meet November 10th at 6:30. We, as always, we went through the monthly reports. The good news is that we are tracking relatively well as far as what our revenues and expenses are. Some things are up, some things are down. Some money hasn't come in as expected as of yet, but it's not, we're not at a point of raising the alarms. So I'm not going to go through in detail because majority of the meeting, the other portion of the meeting was really about the budget and we got the presentation this evening. One thing I do want to point out is at the last board meeting was brought up about monies that wasn't budgeted, unbudgeted dollars that were spent compared to monies received from the grants. And the good news is that we will be adding this to the monthly reports for the next several months. And I asked Mr. Fink that we'll be tracking this very closely. So that will be added to that, and I will be giving updates at the finance meeting. But I will go over this pretty quickly. To date, we approved $2.8 million in unbudgeted expenditures. Now, what that means is so far we've only, of that 2.8 million, we've only spent roughly about $700,000. Some of that is related to the Chromebooks that we didn't receive yet, so the payments didn't go out. They did get better pricing on some things originally that we approved monies for, but so we didn't quite spend as much. So they did really well with purchasing. And some of the not to exceed line items, we didn't come to fully exceeding what was allocated. So we will be watching this and like over the next month to 2 months, we'll start to narrow in closer and closer to refine those numbers as expenditures go out. But money's coming in from the grants. We have grants right now totaling about $1.5 million that was approved. What we did receive so far is we received $423,000 for the PCCD payment. We are waiting on the ESSER. That's it, PDE's Division of Federal Programs, and that's in review, but we should be getting that soon. There is the Special Education COVID-19 Impact Mitigation Grant is in review at PDE as well, and that's $129,000. And the Montgomery County grant is available for reimbursement of the $413,000 that we talked about. I believe that was at the last meeting. So we are balancing off as far as expenditures versus grants that are coming in. But right now, we approved expenditures that exceeded the grants by about $1.4 million. And we'll be looking at that closer in the upcoming months. And as I said, that we will be as well, we will be reporting on this monthly. And I think somewhere along the line, I think one of the things that Ms. Fazzini mentioned about something was recommended for purchase is coming out of the unallocated fund balance. Again, I want to be careful with those words. It's what we're talking about is an unbudgeted line item, which would be then added to this total that I just mentioned a little earlier. So over the next month to 2 months, we really have to refine these numbers. Hopefully the grants will come in as we hoped. But on the flip side, as was mentioned in Mr. Fink's budget presentation, you know, part of what we have to deal with is not knowing where the state is with their budget. And as I've talked about at this board table for numerous years, the state's been running at a deficit year after year, and that deficit has kept growing. They're roughly at up to somewhere between 3.5 billion and $5 billion deficit. They have, in their ultimate wisdom, decided to utilize $1.5 billion of the stimulus money that was supposed to be sent out to the residents of Pennsylvania through different type of stimulus packages. They held that money back, and they're using that to offset their overspending within Pennsylvania. So as I've talked about this, and that's why I brought up early on about these grants, and we have to be careful because some of these grants are directly related to these stimulus packages. And if the state holds back 1.5 billion, that money, it doesn't mean it's going to be allocated down to, you know, businesses, school districts, whatever it may be. So hopefully that won't impact the 1.4 or 1.7 million in grants that we were approved. Keep our fingers crossed that we will receive all that money. But that's what's going on at the state right now. And more, there will be more to come on the budget at the state level and the impacts that it will have on the school district moving forward. That's my report.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Is any of this tied to the CARES Act? Because there's a lot of drama that's going on right now in DC regarding the CARES Act. Yeah, I'm talking about the CARES Act and some of the things Mr. DeBello was speaking to. There's a lot of heated discussion right now in DC about the CARES Act. And there's some concern that it might get put on hold. So I'm just a little concerned where we're looking for money to come through that venue that actually comes through. And it's just for discussion and just to keep our eye on the CARES Act.
We'll have to keep our eye on it. And that's why I said we're going to be watching these at the finance meeting each month. We'll be looking at the grants that we were approved And I know that we brought up earlier this summer when we were getting approved in these grants, it's great that we're approved, but then getting the money is part B. And, you know, there's a lot of this is in review. But again, the board has to keep in mind that we have exceeded our grants by $1.4 million of unbudgeted line items will get passed to somewhere.
So just for clarity, even if a grant has been approved, there's no guarantee that that money is going to come in. And perhaps that is where the word of caution came when we talked about spending some money before the money actually came here. Is that correct, Mr. Jackson? I remember that you specifically had that concern.
Okay, it's a valid concern. Yep.
Okay, and moving on then, Mr. Jackson, to your property report.
Thank you, Madam President. Property Committee met on November 10th. Some of the major topics that were discussed regarding operations, we've implemented a QC/QA program, which is quality control and quality assurance. It ties into the cleaning program. The facilities group has integrated a custodial service into a cloud-based management software, and this software has been populated with all the building-related data, including the cleaning square footage of a building, the designated cleaning zones by employee, and the cleaning requirements for those zones. The operations group is now using this software as a part of their quality control process, which includes multi-point building inspections every day. This process identifies quality of work deficiencies which are corrected immediately and training needed based on those findings. And that's on the quality control. On the quality control, the facilities group has implemented a daily ATP surface testing as a cleaning validation. This test is done through a specialized equipment which gives you a direct measurement of biological concentration, which is RLUs, basically how dirty it is. The random daily testing provides facility a measurement of cleanliness for all our facilities that goes beyond a visual inspection. There was additional discussion regarding the Gotcha farmhouse. This property was acquired through the purchase of the land to build a high school. We had a tenant up to about 10 months ago. They were evicted, and the property is in need of some repair of a septic system replacement and renovations before we put it back on the market. We're securing prices for the septic replacement and the renovations and the construction of a pole barn, and we will present this at the January meeting. There was also discussions regarding some engineering services that will be required for Oaks Elementary and the Bard building, which is the Royersford Library. On the school police and emergency management, there was discussion regarding the PEMA, FEMA Grant 2020. Chief Warrior, Mr. Fink have started the worksheet to initiate that grant process. There was discussions of the purchase of equipment for a server changeover, project replacement cameras at the high school, and both of these items are for board approval. The Springford Police Department has started age-appropriate ALICE training at each school with the goal of having all training completed by the end of the 2021 school year. They've conducted training at several schools and it was extremely successful. Firearm training is scheduled for 11/23 and 11/24 rain dates for all sworn officers. There are two action items that are on the agenda tonight: security camera service changeover project for board approval and security camera replacement for the high school. We're not sure when the next meeting is going to be pending the reorg. And that's my report.
Quick question, Mr. Jackson. The fathers for the buses, have they come in and been installed yet? Have they been received?
I don't think so. Mr. Hunter, can you, or Mr. Fink?
I could be off even about their anticipated date. I don't recall.
We have received a lot of the misters. They're being installed. But some of them have been installed already. We'll be receiving them on blocks over the next couple of weeks, and they'll be installed as they're received by the Custer's mechanics that are on site there.
All right, thank
Okay.
you for that.
You're welcome.
So the buses are being cleaned, whether by the fathers or manually. Got it. Any other questions for Mr. Jackson? Okay, then Christina, legislative?
Maybe some good news, and hopefully we'll answer a couple of the questions that were raised earlier this evening. Today, Governor Wolf did sign into law House Bill 2536, which is now Act 114, as well as Senate Bill 1350, which is Act 17A. That's the Fiscal Code and Appropriations Bill. So that does actually provide Pennsylvania with a budget through June 30th of 2021. Part of that, a couple, for the most part, flat funded in terms of education. We already knew for the majority of the funding, but we also learned that this budget does include an additional $200 million, which was owed to school districts in October for property tax reductions. So that has been approved. That is in the approved budget today, and that will be coming. So we know it's late, but hopefully that's good news for us. And then there will also be some expansion of the early intervention programs for the remainder of the 2020-2021 year. The budget itself is at approximately $35.5 billion. So that was good news. It did move fairly quickly. And so hopefully, again, some of the CARES Act monies that is part of this $200 million that is owed to districts, that is the CARES Act money. And so that will be coming forward hopefully shortly. There are a couple bills that are awaiting Governor Wolf's signature. I think the biggest one is Senate Bill 1216. And it's dealing with the testing and the Keystone exams, whether or not they will be required for graduation. They have actually been, use of Keystone tests have been deferred. This bill itself includes teacher certification flexibility. That was the original intent of this bill, and it's grown significantly since then. But that's also good news. Students who are graduating or completing a program in education will be able to move into the workplace, hopefully a little more rapidly. There are also some special education funding commission items, as well as instructional certificate flexibility, some career and technical exam items, such as the opportunity to waive or ability to waive the NIMS and NOCD exams. There are emergency substitute permits, as well as educator evaluations. And this is something I know I had spoken to a few of our teachers within the district, and it was an area that they were concerned about. So that this is something hopefully that will be favorable given our current environment of virtual and in person. Also includes non-public transportation elements, transportation payments, and what transportation payments will look like for next year. So there's some good news, and things are moving along. Some other areas that we expect the governor to sign, Senate Bill 835, which is broadband accessibility, as well as House Bill 1342, which is vision screening. And then there's a retirement system stress test bill. The one bill that I think many school districts have talked about, and I know we have talked about it here at this table, has to do with liability protection and protecting districts due to COVID, and what kind of protection do school districts have. And so actually House Bill 1737 is pending review by the Office of General Counsel. Pending that approval, it will then move on to the governor's desk for signature. And then just a couple quick ones. School director email addresses was signed into law on October 29th. So it does require that school board members have their email addresses posted on the website. Ours are all posted. If anybody is looking to get in touch with anybody from the Springford Area School District, you can go onto the board page where you see all of our names and phone numbers. Actually, if you just click on our names, that is a hyperlink directly into our emails. So that is already there. And then also sexual assault in schools bill. It was Senate Bill 530, which adds protections to students who have been sexually assaulted.
Can you refresh on that Keystone piece, just to be clear? Has that been passed or is that still?
No, so that's actually, that is on the governor's desk. It has not been signed. It was sent to the governor on November 20th, which I think was Friday.
Okay, so as a result of that, after, I guess at our next formal meeting in January, we'll have to put some communication out either way as to if we're going to continue with the information that has been put out or do something different. Correct?
Oh, yeah, I mean, if there is law that gets rid of the Keystone exam, then that will certainly be something that will need to go out probably well before the January meeting. So
You're right.
So students who are wondering, do I need to take this exam this year? Will maybe have a sigh of relief if the governor signs it.
And preparing on Khan Academy as one of the information pieces was shared, I think, by Dr. Murray, that was one place where you could brush up on that material. So yeah, perhaps as soon as that is signed in, there should be a communication and not wait all the way to January, if that happens.
I don't want to celebrate too much yet, because as far, and I haven't read, but there's still the 5 pathways that we have to deal with for students to graduate. And if they don't take the Keystone, then they have to meet it one of the other ways. And that's going to take a little time to sort through. So our families just shouldn't blindly say no to that. They should know what their options are.
Yeah, they're talking about just deferring it for 1 year for the students for the 11th graders requirement. There's some nuances there, but it's not a matter of the Keystones going away.
No, this is simply Keystone's no longer being required as a graduation requirement. So they were supposed to go into place this year as a graduation requirement. And so now it will defer that for another year. So for example, if you took an algebra class, you don't have to take the Keystone algebra test. By successfully completing that algebra class, you will be deemed as proficient at least for 1 more year in that subject matter.
Yeah, and Dr. Murray did an excellent job of communicating that information on our website. I think it's just important that we direct the parents to that, because as Mr. Rizzo said, there's a lot more to it than just simply, oh, my child doesn't have to take it.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Rizzo, do you have anything else to add in the superintendent's report?
I do, but it will be super fast. So I have 2 things. First of all, we have 4 professionals on our agenda tonight for retiring. Ann Richardson, Mary Sheehan, Cheryl Viscardi, and Kathy Bradfield, combined 72 years of service in the district. I want to thank them for their 3/4 of a century of service to Springford, and we wish them well as they move on to that next phase of their life. And then the last thing is this, yep, sure. And then the last thing I simply have is, this has been a strange start. We all know that. We're coming up on probably I would argue maybe even a strange holiday. But I just want to say, to all of our families and our community members, have a great break, have a great holiday, and do your best to find joy. It's not been easy for us, but find your joy, find some time to breathe, relax, and we look forward to seeing everybody after the holiday break.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. And Mr. Fitzgerald, solicitor's report.
I have no additional report this evening.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll move on to the rest of the agenda. And we have the minutes A through C. Is there a motion to, okay, and a second?
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Moving on to personnel, A through H.
Separate H.
Separate H. I'd also,
Based on the information I got earlier, I'm fine.
I'd still like to separate H and I'd like to separate E1, all others under A through G. Is there a motion
So moved.
and a second? Questions or comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any, okay. Any opposed? Okay, E1, is there a motion? From anyone?
I'm just reading it, sorry.
So it's okay. Is
So moved.
there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments?
This ties back to an item later in the agenda.
It does. That's why I separated it actually, because I have concerns about doing both.
Okay.
And then H, or let's finish E. I'm sorry. Let's finish E. So again, it ties back to the hiring of the consultant that's been identified to continue on. My question is, would this, the amount to pay the consultant, would that be coming from the salary? I do not believe that's the case. Do we have an answer for that? Mr. Catalano, would that be the case with the, I don't believe it's true, but the money for the consultant would not be coming from this. So this person isn't truly ready to take on that role. Is that what we're saying here?
I'm having trouble hearing you. There's a motor running in here. The additional funding is coming out of my operating budget for the consultant.
Okay, coming from your operating budget, but as it stands, this person's not able to take on that position without the consulting?
They're doing the role now. This is to ensure a seamless transition. We're now supporting in-person, virtual, and cyber. And the amount of software programs and what, he's doing the job. This is an insurance policy to help us with rostering, transition, all the other stakes.
Okay.
And I have the money in my operating budget to cover this.
Okay. All right then. Any other questions or comments on E1? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. And then H, is there a motion to approve H, which is regarding the
moved.
attached extracurricular contracts? You,
So moved.
and is there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments? Okay, so I had some questions about this. I know we hit on this a little bit earlier. Has PAC released any guidelines for winter sports? Do we have any of that information? He talked a little bit about that. I'm asking if there's anything additional beyond what we have in terms of our health and safety plans in place.
We have a meeting tomorrow morning with all the PAC protocol in place.
Okay, and some of the other, maybe you've heard this too. I'm not saying that I'm an advocate or a proponent or someone for this or against it, but I have, as we continue to gather information and hear from other districts, I hear that some that are taking the winter sports on and going forward with them are also having the participants go virtual during that season. Is there any consideration that the board? Well, no, it does have something to do with us, but it absolutely does, because it's related to extracurriculars, and we're talking about approving these contracts.
Tom, what was your comment? We couldn't hear you.
Colleen asked if she's hearing in other districts that some school districts are making their students that participate in winter sports go virtual. And all he said was, that's a whole different topic compared to approving extracurricular contracts. And that's a whole, that opens up a whole other can of worms. I mean, I don't.
Yeah,
It
I'd
does
agree with
open up
that.
another whole can of worms, but it is something that, and as I said, I'm not saying that I'm for or against it. It's something that we all need to talk about. What would you propose would be a more adequate time to do that?
Never. Again, you're talking about rearranging schedules and we work so hard to get where we are.
I'm not talking about rearranging
Yeah, you are. You're
schedules
talking
because
about
most of
students
this,
that are coming in. You're talking about students that are already coming in 2 days a week, and now you're saying that those students have to remain virtual the entire time if they're participating in winter sports. I don't even know. I'm trying to make the connection between approving extracurricular contracts and students playing winter sports.
I'll make the connection for you because we're being asked here to approve the extracurricular sports. And what guidelines from Mr. McDaniel's office or administration will be surrounding those sports? I guess that would be one of my questions, if there will be administrative recommendations coming to us about the winter sports. Obviously, Mr. McDaniel just said there's a meeting with PAC tomorrow where they will likely have some discussion about this. And I'm also asking what discussion the administration has had or will have around this. Is this something that the administration will consider, as I've heard other districts are doing that, or something that's not on the table altogether?
I don't see how that's on the table. This is asking us to approve the stipends or not approve them if we cancel the sports. It has nothing to do with whether we're playing the sports at this point, how we send the kids to school or not. It's just talking about the payment.
We can move off of that and move on. I would disagree that there is a reference in here that the stipends and the events taking place would all be determined by what happens. But we can have this discussion at another time. It's interesting, though, we will not have another meeting before things go into play. And I just want to make sure that we are crossing our Ts and dotting our Is. And if we're not going to do any of that, I'm not saying I take issue with that. I'm saying that this is what I'm hearing is happening in some of the other schools. And is it something that we want to address here or not? I get the feeling that we don't want to address that here. So
Are you referencing where it says the district reserves the right to prorate or not pay stipends in the event of a school closure, school modification, and or discontinuation of the activity due to the pandemic? Because if you're talking about that being like a school modification and the district reserves the right to prorate it, who makes that decision and at what point? Is that what you're referring to?
I'm taking this in a different direction. I'm saying, okay, this is on here. We're having a discussion about extracurriculars. What else is going on with extracurriculars?
Yeah, but that's not the point of H. That's not what this is addressing at all.
Okay, we can revisit that at another time. We can revisit that under board comment where I was going with that. And then instead, we will just take H for exactly what it is here and just approval of those contracts for the 2021.
So moved.
Is there a second? I think there already was a first and a second for those. Okay, so all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so then H carries. Then moving on to finance, A through J. Now, with that, please note that I did make note in the beginning that on D10, there is a change to that regarding the Lakeside Youth Service, that this will be pending solicitor approval. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Then 7, new property, A and B.
So moved.
Questions or comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Then under new programming and curriculum, we're going to do each of these individually. A, is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further questions or comments?
Yes. Okay. Ties back to the previous item, but we're saying Mrs. Cox is going to provide consulting services. So if she's going to be a consultant, is she going to produce workman's comp insurance, professional indemnity? I mean, it seems like a lot for $7,500.
I apologize. I can't hear. There's a motor running over there and
We're calling her a consultant, which means she's going to be a small business, which means for $7,500, she's going to produce workman's comp insurance, professional liability insurance, professional indemnity. It seems like a lot for $7,500. Yes, you will.
she's not on site. She's virtual.
I don't understand the difference. I mean, she's still a consultant. At least that's what's written here.
My understanding is she's a 1099 and we just pay her hourly.
So does she live in Pennsylvania?
Correct.
Okay, so she wouldn't need workers' comp because if she's a sole proprietor or sole owner of the business, she wouldn't get workers' comp. But I agree with, has there been a contract been approved by legal as a consulting contract? Does she have the insurances in place? Does she have professional insurances as far as if she provides bad information and yeah, error of emissions? I mean, there's a lot of things that.
I'd like to visit this arrangement. I'm not aware of it. One of the concerns I generally have is when you have a Peasers employee becoming a independent contractor soon thereafter. There's been cases on that. So I'd like to see how this arrangement is worked out in order to make sure not only that we're complying with what we would want out of an independent contractor, but IRS test, Peasers test, Department of Labor test. I think if it passed that muster, then certainly can come back to you guys. But I just want to make sure that we're kosher in that regard.
And the question, I'm sorry. The other question I have is when this was originally presented, I guess there was consulting services up to not to exceed $50,000, and that was now went from 50,000 to 7,500. Why the change in hours and expectations?
After reevaluating it with Keith Bortz and Kathy, it was determined that we only needed 150 hours more to ensure a smooth transition with all the software.
All right, well, it sounds like we're kind of in a holding pattern because legal would have to look at whatever agreements are in place before we could proceed forward anyway.
Can we make an amendment to it to proceed pending the approval of legal?
Well, see, that would be one of my concerns because I believe that the contract was presented to us in our board memo, not this past Friday, but the Friday before. Is that correct?
Yes, but it wasn't approved by
Yes,
legal.
but that's right. So when I did talk with Mr. Fitzgerald briefly and I asked him if he had it and they had not reviewed it. So that concerns me because that's talking, a good chunk of time that could have been gotten over to him. So I would rather not go forward with that, let him see it, and then we decide at that point.
Well, there's a motion on the table, so should we just?
So Mr. Fitzgerald, do we pull the motion at this point? Because now we're not going to be back together here to do this until January.
Well, I think it ultimately depends on what we need and how quickly we need it. If this is something that we need service-wise from this individual sooner than later, what I would recommend is we modify it, allow me to look at it, determine if we are okay from an independent contractor status, and then we can move forward. So if you want to give the authorization for this financial commitment tonight, I can then look at it to determine whether we're good to go from a contractual perspective.
And at this point, then, if we were to modify that item pending solicitor
Review.
review and approval, do we need to take public comment on that item?
No, because what we're doing is we are essentially approving the action item now, subject to the caveat of review and approval of the agreement by my office. So the substance of it has been there for public consumption.
What's the harm with just holding off for another month? It's until the end of June, so it can't be a pressing consulting thing. It seems like it's, we've got at least 6-7 months.
I think I heard Mr. Catalano say it's to help train the person who's taking over this position. So if that person already started November 9th, then
Well,
If
if
we wait
that
till
were the
Jan-
case, then I have more significant concerns
Then if-
about why are we extending it all the way until June then,
We
if that were
wait.
the case.
I'm just reading as, if I read that we approved somebody who was hired effective June 9th. So if that's the case, then, and it's to help get that person up to speed, I would think waiting 2 months might be a long time. Accurate?
Well, I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, but I would suspect that we'll be having a meeting the second week of December anyway. I'm just saying.
Or the first week.
All righty then, so there is a first and the second. Now it has been revised. Do we need to get a new first and
No,
second?
I don't think it was officially revised.
Who made the initial motion and second on this one? Do we
I think
recall?
I made the initial.
Okay, do you have any objection to the amendment reflecting my office to review the final independent contractor arrangement?
No, that's fine.
All right, so it would be viewed as a friendly amendment to the underlying motion, then we vote on it with the amendment.
So with that, any other questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. I think there are 3. Clinton, you said no. Tom said no. I said no. There were 3 no's. Well, that motion does pass, so you should see that coming to your office. The next one is B, the agreement with EBS for information technology consultants. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there a second? Wendy, you did say a second. Okay, questions or comments?
So is this the group, the consultants that have been working previously with the teachers to get the technology set up?
Yes. Last meeting, I was asked to put together a projection of what we would need for, the original proposal was for consultants up till December 31st. So I went back and evaluated the need, did some projections, and I recommend we keep 5 until the end of the year. We're projected to spend approximately $47,000 from the first time they got here until December 31st. The original motion was for 150. So we have 103 left, 5 consultants for 22 weeks. It's $143,000. So we need an additional $20,200 to maintain those 5 consultants for the remainder of the year, based on the original monies approved. That's the math.
Well, how many did you actually use in this first part? Because I think it was up to,
We cleared 10, we used 8, we're using 6 currently. 7.
The feedback that I had gotten is that they were very helpful to the teachers in preparing for the transition to, coming back into school, that they were. And so I would be curious if anybody had any reason they felt that we should not be continuing to offer that kind of service to our staff. So.
Why, that's not what we're voting on. And I have a whole bunch of questions, but that's not what we're voting on. The services will continue to the staff. What he's saying is he needs another $20,000 on top of the original 150 that we approved, that he's projecting out to the end of the year, is what the motion is.
But that's based on everybody being full-time, which that's a hard sell to me. That every temp employee we have is gonna be full-time.
So
Well, here, I'll jump in on this one. Just so a couple of things, just out of trying to pace, we use temps in one description and then we use consultants in another. And I understand, but I'm just, so that's, I guess, if we could clean that up and just have a consistent use, it's easier to track. And, in general, we're being asked to vote on something where I'm hearing hearsay that some teachers liked it. I mean, we're talking about requests for assistance, right? I mean, if we could apply some data to this, it would help, verifying that, are instances or requests going up? Are they declining? Given that we've introduced a lot for sure, and I would imagine that over some time, these requests are going to reduce in nature, right? The only thing that I recall reading was that over the first 2 days, we were able to handle 151 requests. And again, I think that's, hopefully these type of requests are diminishing in nature. So, that's the only thing that's frustrating from my perspective is that, I'm seeing an additional amount of money, and yet I have nothing to verify whether or not it's needed. And I don't like to use, hearsay or just sort of, we want to continue to give support. I think having data would make the decision a lot easier from my perspective.
Mr. Catalano, is this something that you need right now? I mean, from what I thought I heard you say is the original approval was for 150,000. To date, you have spent down 47,000, leaving you 103,000. So you still have a good 4 months worth of support right now in the pipeline. Is that correct? Is this maybe something we could revisit a little closer to that time once we see what the need really is at that point? I'm concerned partially because you're asking for this from the unassigned fund balance, which, as Mr. DeBello said, we keep building, right? We keep 20,000 here and 20,000 there when it's unfunded, unbudgeted spending. We're trying to get our hands around that and kind of rope that in a little bit. So is it perhaps something that, or is it time bound? I mean, do you have to have that answer today?
I was just fulfilling the request that was asked of me last meeting to put together projections from January to June.
Thank you.
And I'm the one that made the suggestion based on the preliminary information that you requested 19 temps. The last meeting 2 weeks ago, I asked how many temps that you used, and you said you used 5. And then you said that of those 5 temps, you basically were able to do at that point in time, 312 teachers were completed at that time. There's about a dozen or so that were left to do. And, I'm just running numbers in my head and I'm not tracking the numbers. And then you're saying you're going to use 5 through the rest of this year, which is going to be, now that 47,000, is that from the beginning till the end of December, or is that from this point through to December?
We're projected to spend $47,000 by the end of December 31st.
So including what was spent so far?
Total,
right. And you're talking about holding on average five temps.
I'd like to keep 5 on and use them as needed. I've been evaluating the data each week. If there's no work or there's anything, we send them home. For example, Friday afternoon, we didn't have work. We sent them home.
Right.
And they're here and they're paid as needed.
Right. And then the 4 open positions, obviously there was one that was filled tonight. Were the other 3 open positions that you have been filled?
I hired another support tech. That's Aaron. It was on today. I hired an IA, but she's still being held. And I made an offer to a system tech this week. and I have 2 more people potentially that are qualified candidates.
So then you anticipate having full staff by the end of the year?
Yes.
Okay. So, and again, and I thank you for the numbers and stuff that you put together, because I was the one that asked you to do that. What I didn't expect was that there was gonna, I'd like to get us a little further along, maybe to, you know, by the end of the first quarter, we could revisit and say, this is what's been spent to date. And this is what you believe will be needed for the remaining, you know, school year, because I think a lot of things still are going to change, and I really don't want to throw another $20,000 on you know, unbudgeted line item, because potentially you might not spend it, which is great, or you may have to, and we have to do what we have to do. But like I said, I do appreciate that you did fulfill requests that I said you should project through the rest of this year. But I would recommend we hold off spending any more money until we see where we're at as we go into January, February next year.
So with that, I think we should remove that. Can we remove that from the agenda, Mr. Fitzgerald? Is that, we do have a motion and a second. These were questions and comments. I'd rather not take a vote and vote it down. I don't think we're saying that. I think we're asking him to hold it.
Well, why don't we do a table motion then? Why don't we see if there's a motion to table?
I move to table.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, and then we just vote on the table motion. Yeah.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, then we'll do that and table that. Thank you, Mr. Catalano, for putting that together. Let's just keep a pulse on that and then come back and revisit at a later time.
And Madam President, before we go on, just a moment, please. Mr. Schaefer, with all due respect, I do appreciate that you desire data, and I do agree with data would be good. However, when I share feedback, I don't appreciate it being referred to as hearsay from other people. So, thank you.
Yeah, there's also a lot of data was presented on what was needed and what has been, all the technology has done, and the numbers of requests, the number of tickets at the curriculum meeting, at the past curriculum meeting in October and the one in September also. So there was a lot of data. If you want to talk to me or Mr. Catalano, you can get the majority of that. The other thing is that the difference between the temp and the consultant, they're totally 2 separate positions. One was a woman who worked for a long period of time for Springford, and the temps are, it's a totally different situation. So it's not really comparable.
Okay, are we talking about B? Because in B, it says these consultants. I mean, I don't know. It's not worth sort of, but that's all I was asking. I was specifically asking about, are these temps or are these consultants, not A, which is a consultant position.
Okay, are there any other responses to that? Okay, so with that, then I think we will move on from that point. We have agreed to go ahead and table that motion. And looking at C, we have also removed that motion from the agenda for this evening, as I announced earlier. So now we are at D, approval to enter into a 3-year subscription agreement with Toshiba.
So moved.
Excuse me, to utilize the Docuware indexing software. Now, is there a motion?
You don't have to read it.
Well, I don't think that our audience or the people on Zoom know what it says, and that's why I was referencing just a brief part of it. Is there a motion?
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. New conferences and workshops.
So moved. Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. For your reference, there's also other business and new other business. And those are a list of policies that have been reviewed that I mentioned earlier. Board comment. I have a comment regarding consistency at committee meetings. As a point of clarification, I would like for the board to direct what the procedure is, as I think we do lack consistency at our committee meetings, across the committee meetings, and I want to be sure that we're clear and fair at all of those. So what I'm referencing is when the committee is present and the committee is doing their work, if a board member is in attendance that is not on that committee, does that board member, does the board agree here that that board member can still speak at any time during that meeting, or do they hold their comment to board comment? Because there have been different times throughout my time and other people's time here as well, where it's different rules for different people. So I think that coming together, we need to clarify across committees, how are we going to treat that piece? And whichever way we choose is fine. We just need to set that agenda straight from the beginning here to avoid any kind of inconsistencies going forward.
I guess help me to understand. So the question is, can a board member speak, let's say at curriculum? I'm not on the curriculum committee. So can I speak when Dr. Wright is speaking about something? Or do I need to hold my comment to the end of the meeting? Is that the question?
That's correct.
I would think a board member could speak at any time. I guess I'm not sure of the issue.
I think one advantage from my perspective is when you're on the topic at the committee meeting, and if someone has a comment or a question, it seems to be more relevant at that point instead of waiting for 45 minutes later to go back to that point. I can see it from both ways, but I don't see that we save any time. I think we lose continuity by having to wait till the end of the meeting when you have a comment or a question.
So
that's just my input.
the way it's been, and I don't know what we're referring to, but the way it's been is that if a board member shows up at a committee meeting, the board member could interact and talk at any time. But when it comes time to make a recommendation to the board, it's only the committee people that make a recommendation to the board. So if
Right.
that's not happening, I don't know where that happened.
Well,
but-
I can explain further because last week I attended several committee meetings, and in one, non-committee board members were speaking freely and asking questions on topic as the conversations were going on. And another one, a board member was asked to hold comment until board comments at the end of the meeting, at which time the committee had already resolved whatever conversation was going on, and now you have to go back and revisit it, reopen it. That isn't saving any time. So I agree. I think that if you're attending, you're participating, you should have the right to make a comment or ask a pertinent question when the topic is under discussion. So that's
Because
where it came
if
from.
you think about this, this was done to Mr. Rizzo tonight. He was speaking, all of a sudden, everybody jumped in, which was fine, and was able to address the issues, and he kept moving. I guess I would see, I would think if I'm at a committee meeting or any other board member who's not on that committee, that they have the right to voice their opinion or make a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, just not vote.
I think that's
fine. And then
There's no voting in committee meetings. It's the
No.
recommendation. So it's the committee people that would discuss about making a recommendation to the board.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, all committee meetings I've been in, if a board member's there, they could talk. I mean, it's better for them to ask questions while they're there. In fact, I think it would be encouraged.
So I think that then going forward and along the lines with some policy that we have that references this just slightly, that yes, at any time, and we all agree that at any time when you're in attendance, you may speak during the committee meeting, but not to make recommendations as part of the committee. but going forward, we're all on the same page on that, correct?
Right, and I think that
Okay.
the board comment at the end is if you're bringing up something that hasn't been on the agenda or something, you're introducing something new. That's the way I look at it.
I think while we're on this topic, though, it does apply to the public in some cases as well, especially for those committee meetings where we have merged multiple topics. So for example, you may have somebody who comes to the property meeting specifically for the property piece, but they don't want to stay for the entire, right? So, or somebody who came for just curriculum or just technology. So especially in those situations, and certainly I think most notably in the extracurricular committee, I see it the most is when in the past where we've had families who come as their children present, and after they complete their presentation, they leave. But we may have community members who are there who want to ask a question, but they have to hold their question till the end, but now all of the presenters have left. Yeah, so I think to some extent, each committee has to find the right balance, but I think we should have that minimum. Does that make sense? Like the.
It does make sense. And I recall when I was doing use of facilities, which was
right,
a very long, tedious process before COVID. And during that time, there were different representatives from different organizations that used our facilities where it was appropriate to get their input about certain things as we were going through the policy meeting, rather than tackling the use of facilities policy, moving through the rest of the agenda, and then getting their comment and going all the way back. So, which relates a little bit to what I think Diane is saying, that it's more appropriate at the time to do it at the time.
So I think if we could just establish kind of the lowest common denominator, right? What is the minimum that each committee should look like? And if that means that, whatever that is, and then, allow for each committee structure to operate appropriately based on their topics and the participation.
So the committee, when you were doing use of facilities, for example, you invited those groups in to talk about but okay, so committee meetings, and Mr. Fitzgerald, correct me if I'm wrong, but committee meetings are working sessions for boards to work through issues, correct?
Sure. I mean, that's not what defines a committee meeting, but that's generally the premise of the committee is.
Right, so getting public comment, you're not required to take public comment at all, committee meetings.
That is my interpretation of the
Right.
Sunshine Act. Correct.
So we here at Springford have given the opportunity for public to interact and ask questions like we do much at the board meetings here. And we switched over to this a few years ago, and the reason we switched it because committee meetings were going on and on and on, because when community people showed up, we're trying to do work, and there's just a lot of questions, and then just questions would go off topic, and so we went to the format of very similar to what we do here, that there's comment in the beginning of the meeting related to agenda items, and at the end, if there's any additional comments that the committee, we allow that, but we don't have to. But we've done that here at Springford to get community involvement. If a community person is invited, and we use extracurriculars as an example, where clubs will come in or whatever and present to the committee, and there's some questions that come up through that presentation, then we've kind of allowed that to happen. But we've tried to keep the committee meetings structured so that, because what was happening was they're running over and going longer and running into other meetings, because we end up spending a lot of time answering a ton of questions, and then the board wasn't able to do work on what they're trying to go through for that agenda item.
So then perhaps the current structure is the lowest common denominator. All I suggested was we look to establish and make sure that the lowest common denominator is where we are, that it makes sense, that it's where we want to be across all of the committees, and we move forward.
I agree, and I agree with Tom where we are.
Yeah, because the whole point is if we don't have consistency amongst the committees, then people show up and they have expectations from one committee, then another committee is going to be different. But I do agree that anytime a board member shows up, they are part of that meeting and they can interact and ask questions through the entire committee meeting. They don't have to wait for board comment. Because because we would encourage board members to show up and ask questions at committee meetings. But when it actually comes time to make a recommendation to the board, it's strictly through the committee members. Because we got to be careful of violation of sunshine law as well.
Okay, I think we're good. I think we're clear on that. And so my other piece that I guess I'll bring back up is a request for Mr. McDaniel to please share whatever PAC information comes out, just to keep us in the loop about what's happening with that. And I would ask Mr. Rizzo to talk to your administrative team if there were to be any recommendations or anything regarding the winter sports, which I know are a hot topic. And I am not trying to put a lid on those. I'm just trying to understand and make sure that we're clear, doing everything that we're supposed to do to get that season going also. Any other board comments? No? Okay. I guess then we will move on to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's 30 seconds, 2 seconds. I just, all of our staff, all of our students, all of our families, all of our administration have just done an amazing job managing these transitions that we've gone through. And as we approach Thanksgiving, I'm thankful for all of you, but take a couple minutes to find that which you are thankful for, rest a little, relax a little, get rid of a little of the stress and pressure, enjoy your time together as your family. And again, thank you to everybody. And certainly to all of the folks who sit around the table here. It's been a long 10 months or so, but it's been a pleasure to sit with all of you. So I wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, thank you. Yes, happy Thanksgiving 2020 to all. And public comment or public to be heard. Go ahead. We're going to do in-house first. Go ahead.
Hi, Mary Jo McNamara, 187 Abbey Drive, Royersford, PA. So just some general comments. With regard to the attestation, we had talked this summer about N95 masks and being certified. And does any of that play into us agreeing to the mask compliance that the governor's asking us to do? I never heard anything more about it. We should update the metrics that appear weekly instead of being by grade level to be by school level so that people can understand if we're going to evaluate the attestation at a school level as the governor is recommending. I wanted to kind of find out about the update on the tech and teacher person rollout. I think Mr. DeBella talked about it. Since we're closed, are the consultants being sent home? What are the ticket metrics and the help desk metrics? Sorry. What's the update on Wednesdays? People are still kind of not figuring it out. I hope people are using the suggestion box that's on the website. I have. Thank you for that. Do the students know what the cleaning protocols are so that if they're not being done, and where to report that if they're not, or if they see something that's not being adhered to? And then for the unassigned funding, if the remainder of the stimulus money is being distributed back to the state, which I think is about $1.3 billion, I guess I would ask for us to put a freeze on the unassigned funding and spending on the unassigned funding. And then the last thing is the last thing that was approved, which was the conference for attending the elephant in the room, the assessment and management of suicide risk during COVID. I would ask that the counselors come back or someone comes back and gives us feedback on what that conference was like. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the room? Well, Mr. Cromley is in the room.
Oh, I thought you left.
Nope, he's right over there. Mr. Catalano, there are two people. Please go ahead.
First up is Amy Belletta. Amy, first and last name, full address, and your public comment, please.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Amy Belletta, 620 Pine Street in Roarsford. I'm calling in tonight in support of Mr. DeBello's comment in regards to notification of positive COVID cases in our classrooms. I think we need to be realistic in regards to our teachers interacting with our students, specifically in regards as it happened in one of my child's elementary school classrooms. We're fortunate enough to have one of the very best elementary school teachers. She keeps my son engaged and he loves coming into her classroom daily. There is no way I could ever expect or ask her to keep her 6-foot distance while teaching our children. This is the model I chose for my son, in person, engaged, learning. If I wanted my son to have her lecture from her desk, I would have kept him virtual. These children spend over 6 hours a day in this school, most of which is in the same classroom. Springford cannot guarantee in any building that 6 foot of social distancing can be achieved. This has previously been stated by Dr. Gooden and the nurse Smith tonight. I'd also like to ensure that we are up to date on the latest definition of close contact. This is defined as 15 minutes of cumulative time within a 24-hour time period, which was updated in late October. We agonized and questioned our decision to send our son back to school full-time in person, trusting that this school district would keep our son safe and do the right thing when it came to a positive case. We were not naive to think a positive case would not occur. We trusted Springford to notify us regarding the cases within our son's school environment, and then we could decide what the next course of action for our son and our family based on our risk and exposure. The school took it upon themselves to keep this information to themselves until after 5 p.m. tonight, when I was finally received a call from the school nurse when our teacher tested positive at the end of last week. We received an email from Dr. Gooden basically stating that they didn't consider the teacher being in her elementary school classroom all day close contact. I, like many other parents, find this extremely concerning. What else is the school keeping from us? Many local school districts notify their parents of each and every COVID case that occurs in their school building. The backbone of this reopening plan is based on mutual trust and respect. Trust and respect that we are giving all the information available to make decisions for our individual families. Thank you.
Next up is Michael Lebedinsky. Michael, first and last name, full address, and your public comment, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Michael Lebedinsky, 2005 Willowwood Drive, Royersford, PA. Just a comment for Mr. Rizzo from his earlier superintendent report. Just curious how many of the cases that you mentioned were symptomatic versus asymptomatic? How many were actual infections as opposed to COVID or non-COVID viral material detected in the PCR test in the absence of an infection? And how many positive cases were or are hospitalized? I ask these questions due to a significant ruling last week by the appeals court in Portugal that ruled PCR tests are too unreliable to be used for determining public policy, quarantining, or isolation. The court's ruling stated, and I quote, if someone is tested by PCR as positive, when a threshold cycle of 35 cycles or higher is used, as is the rule in most laboratories in Europe and the United States, the probability that said person is infected is less than 3%. And the probability that said result is a false positive is 97%. Related to this ruling, a peer-reviewed, randomized, controlled trial study was finally published in the prestigious Journal of the American College of Physicians last week that followed 6,000 adults for 60 days in Denmark earlier this year and concluded, and I quote, no statistically significant difference, unquote, in the COVID infections between the group wearing masks and the group not wearing masks. This confirms what we have all observed in our local community, that despite almost universal mask wearing, The days are shorter, less sunny, and more cold, and thus the virus spreads despite masks, same as the flu does every flu season, despite having a vaccine for it. Speaking of places the virus is not spreading, the following is a list of organizations and people that have clearly and unambiguously stated that students are safer in class, in school, and that the virus is not a significant source of virus spread. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CHOP Labs Policy Lab Director David Rubin, all primary schools in Europe are open even though businesses are locked down. Bucks County Health Department, Berks County Health Department, Chester County Health Department, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, Tom Wolf, Andrew Cuomo, John Carney, Ned Lamont, Gina Raimondo, and Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker. You'll probably notice that Montgomery County is not on that list because they keep flip-flopping, as Mrs. Zakowski rightly called out in the Monco Office of Public Health Zoom meeting last week. As evidence, 2 weeks ago, Val Arcouche publicly stated on her Facebook page that the virus isn't spreading in district schools. Subsequently, PSEA President Richard Askey issued a statement demanding all virtual, which caused Commissioner Arcouche to flip-flop, strong-arm the Office of Public Health board members to mandate 2 weeks virtual, to which they complied.
Okay, thank you.
There are no more hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. And is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Meeting adjourned.